Chapter 826. In the blink of an eye, 4 years had passed. In the middle of the Qing River in Donghua State, on a nameless mountain, there was a cave hidden deep inside the mountain. The eldest disciple of the Yuanyang sect, Qiao Jingdao, was sitting there quietly. He had been here for half a year, and the person in charge of the Fenglai mountain was a substitute. Because the person's cultivation was similar to his, he had changed his appearance and did not show himself often. To prevent Yang Poyu from coming out again, he stopped building the altar. So until now, no one had seen through him. As far as he knew, he was not the only one who did this. All the people who wanted to sneak into the true cave of the northern region did this. This was not only to hide from the cultivators of the devil's doctrine, but also to deceive the Qinsang school, hoping to get the devil's cave first. At this moment, he suddenly felt something. He picked up a talisman and waved it. A scene appeared in a silver mirror in front of him. In the white waves, there were several green carps patrolling back and forth. One of them had especially bright eyes. It seemed to have sensed the change of qi dynamic, so it wandered in the underground river. Qiao Jingdao frowned. He could see that this was the northern underworld fish demon that Zhang Yan had placed in the major water systems. They were used as his eyes and ears. He did not care much about it before, but now it seemed like it was a big problem. Even if he flew underground, it was faster to travel through the spirit vein. This was also the place where most of the devil's doctrine's prohibitions were set up. But with the talisman as a cover, there was no need to be afraid. But now, half of the places where spiritual vigor was stagnant in the northern region were occupied by the altars of the small sects under the Qinsang school. As long as he traveled underground, he would inevitably bump into them. Both Xianmen and Xianmen had different methods. The talisman could bypass the devil's doctrine, but it might not be detected by the Xianmen. There was another troublesome matter. In another 30 days, the others would meet up with him here. But looking at the current situation, it would be hard not to be discovered. His face darkened and he raised his hand. He wanted to kill the green carp outside, but after thinking for a while, he clenched his fist and put it down. I heard that many elders of the North Yuyuan tribe have surrendered to Zhang Yan. If I hit the young ones, if the old ones come out, wouldn't all my previous efforts be in vain? He had to endure it. Don't ruin the overall situation because of a moment of impulse. He thought about it for a long time. Other than taking a detour, there was no other way. Furthermore, he couldn't let the others come here. Something unexpected had happened before, so he had to warn them. Thus, he took out a Dharma plate from his sleeve, which shone with spiritual light. As soon as it appeared, it shone brightly, but in the short span of a few breaths, it retracted all of its light and became like an ordinary object. He circulated his magic power and wrote a line of words on it. This item was called the mysterious flying talisman. It was refined by the Heaven Mending Pavilion, and when it was sent out, it was invisible. Unless Taoist Master Heavenly Passage deliberately looked, no one would be able to discover it. However, this item was very rare. Even though he was the eldest disciple of the sect, he was only given 3 pieces. After he finished writing, he waved his sleeve lightly and sent it out. Then, he entered a meditative state. After about a month, 4 rays of spiritual light suddenly flashed in this cave. 4 figures appeared one after another. They all bowed to Qiao Jingdao, who was sitting on the ground. "Greetings, Brother Qiao." "Greetings, eldest brother." Qiao Jingdao opened his eyes and looked around. He said in a deep voice, "You haven't been discovered yet, right?" Shi Muhua of Taihao School said confidently, "Brother Qiao, don't worry. We were already prepared. After receiving your message, we were extremely careful on our way here." Shi Hanshan also said, "Eldest brother, we were on the road for more than 10 days. It's to avoid detection from all sides." Qiao Jingdao nodded and said, "That's good. When the demonic cave appears, we will also have to be careful when we head north." Shi Muhua raised his eyebrows and said loudly, "Brother Qiao, I don't think we need to be like this. Qinsang school doesn't have the earthly divine talisman like us, so we can only attack from the surface. Most of the demonic sex arrangements are here. As long as we are fast enough, what can we do even if they discover us? By the time they arrive, we will have already taken down the demonic cave. According to the agreement of the sects, the heavenly abode will deal with the aftermath. Why should we be afraid? Sure, Hans Han echoed, eldest senior brother, I agree with what you said. Even though the earthly divine talisman is fast, it can only last for 2 hours. If we take a detour, who knows what other variables might occur. The faster we move, the better. We must kill our way into the devil's lair before the other families can react. Qiao Jingdao pondered for a while, then turned to a handsome young Daoist on the far right and asked, Junior brother Yuan, what do you think? Yuan Zirong smiled and said, before coming here, Yellow Jinren told me to listen to my senior brothers. Whatever you say, I will do. Qiao Jingdao said in a deep voice, Junior brother Shi's words are reasonable. Let's do as he says. Shi Muhua said happily, good. Once the demonic cave appears, we will kill our way in and make a great contribution. After the 5 finished their discussion, they each chose a place to sit down. Then, they calmed their minds and restrained their breath. They closed their eyes and waited for the demonic cave to appear. In the blink of an eye, another year passed. In the heavenly lake of clear serenity, Zhang Yan was guiding the cultivation of the 3rd-generation disciples. However, after saying a few words, he suddenly stopped. Then, his eyes lit up and he looked outside. Many disciples revealed bewildered expressions, and only Lu Yenni, Tian Kun, and Wei Zihong sensed something in their hearts, and their expressions gradually became solemn. Not long after, the disciples felt a tremor coming from under their feet. At first, it was very small, but it became more and more intense. Then, the entire heavenly lake of clear serenity began to shake. They could also hear the rumbling sound, and the tremor became more and more intense. However, when it reached the most intense moment, it suddenly disappeared, and the world returned to silence. It seemed like a moment had passed, but it also seemed like a long time. Then, there were several loud rumbles, and the ground shook up and down. 5 beams of spiritual light shot up from all directions in the Donghua continent. They were like rainbows, shining in the sky, covering the sun and the sky. It was difficult to tell day from night for a moment. The surging was so intense that it was like a tsunami. Even in the Dongshan continent, which was far away by the ocean, the cultivators in the continent also felt a little strange. Zhang Yan looked up at the sky, his eyes deep. He said in a deep voice, the demonic cave has appeared. Pass down my chief's order everyone to quickly gather at the heavenly lake of clear serenity, and follow me to suppress it. Almost at the same time, Qiao Jingdao suddenly woke up from his meditation. He carefully sensed for a moment, and his eyes lit up. He stood up, took a deep breath, and said, the time has come. The 4 people beside him also woke up at the same time and stood up. Qiao Jingdao said in a deep voice, everyone, success or failure depends on this. The prosperity of the sect rests on our shoulders. Don't let down the master's trust. The 4 of them nodded solemnly. Qiao Jingdao took out the earthly divine talisman from his sleeve and patted it lightly. Suddenly, a cool breeze surrounded his body, and his whole person became like a cloud, faintly discernible. The 4 of them did the same. Qiao Jingdao saw that everyone was prepared and nodded at them. The 5 of them activated their Xian Qi, and in an instant, 5 weak beams of spiritual light shot out from underground, and with the speed of lightning, they rushed towards the north. Although the earthly divine talisman could only last for 2 hours, its speed was almost comparable to that of the Yuanian cultivators flying in the sky above Zhoutian. Everywhere it passed, it stirred up a lot of spiritual opportunity, but the devil's doctrine's prohibition did not sense it at all. But in the aspect of Xianmen, it was different. On an altar in front of Danyang Mountain in Beichen sect, a disciple suddenly exclaimed in surprise. His fellow disciple beside him was from the Yen family. Just now, there was an unusually big commotion in the continent, so how could he not know that the Devil's Cave had appeared? It was a tense moment, and when he heard the commotion, he immediately came up and asked, "What's wrong?" The disciple pointed at the talisman on the altar that had turned into ashes, and said, "Just now, there are several spiritual opportunities below, and they are heading north at an extremely fast speed." The Yen family disciple's expression changed, and he asked anxiously, "Are they Devil's Doctrine cultivators?" The previous disciple shook his head, and said, "Doesn't look like it. Look at that qi dynamic, they seem to be from our Xian men." The Yen family disciple said, "Zhenren Zhang has ordered that we should not let go of any small details. Ignore him, and immediately report the situation here." The disciple immediately wrote a letter, and after sealing it, he was about to throw it into the lake when the Yen family disciple shouted, "Why do we still need a fish demon to send a letter at this time? Use a flying letter to send a letter." The disciple did not dare to disobey, and nodded in agreement. He hurriedly took the flying letter, and sent it out of the mountain. At the same time, on the path that Xiao Jingdao and the others had passed, they had alarmed a dozen or so altars in succession. One after another, flying letters soared into the sky, and continuously flew towards the heavenly lake of clear nether. In the great lake of Dragon Lake, within the Longview Yuanzhan and Light Cave, Sun Jinren was reclining on a jade couch. At this time, he suddenly sensed something, and sat up abruptly. He pushed away the beautiful servant girl beside him, and a clear divine light appeared in his eyes. He looked towards the southwest several times, and suddenly laughed coldly. He raised his hand, and a talisman appeared. Then, with a flick of his finger, it shot into the air with a whoosh. At this time, Zhang Yan had already received the letters from the various departures. Hearing that there were actually people from Xianmen traversing underground, and heading north, he could not help but focus his gaze, and pondered what their intentions were. After a few breaths, suddenly, a ray of divine light flew over. His expression changed, and he stretched out his hand to touch it. Immediately, he heard the voice of Sun Jinren, the first disciple of Yuan Yang, Qiao Zhengdao, and a couple of disciples from his sect, as well as 2 disciples from Taihao and Nanhua, a total of 5 Yuanyin cultivators of the 3rd degree realm, are heading towards the demon's cave that appeared in the north. Zhang Yan's gaze flickered slightly, and he suddenly asked, "Today, what is the situation of the 2 demons' caves in the east and west of Fenglai?" Immediately, a disciple picked up a flying letter, looked at it, and said, "The cultivators from Taihao and Nanhua are now fighting with the demonic sect. At the demon's cave in the west of Fenglai, Yuan Yang did not make a move, not even a single disciple was sent out." Zhang Yan asked again, "Where are the disciples from Huanjin, Lishan, Pingdu, and Mending Tian?" The disciple picked up the letter, and said, "In reply to Founding Master, the disciples of these 4 sects were obstructed by the elder of the Netherworld Spring sect, Koing Long, and they are now fighting." Zhang Yan came down to ask about the other directions, and after listening, his gaze became extremely deep. In a short moment, he had already made a clear judgment. Looking at the overall situation, 4 out of the 5 demons' caves were still considered normal, and all of them were guarded by Xuanmen's disciples. However, the demon's cave in the west of Fenglai was suddenly ignored due to various reasons, and now it was unusually empty. Chapter 827. Zhang Yan's mind raced. The purpose of Yuan Yang's sect's action was not something that could be seen through in a short time. Perhaps they thought that the northern demon cave was the real cave and wanted to attack it before Qinsang school, or perhaps there was something there that they needed. However, no matter what the real reason was, it was not right to ignore a demon cave that they had yet to figure out. On the surface, there were already 3 Yuanyin cultivators in the 3rd stage of Yuan Yang sect heading to the northern demon cave, including their eldest disciple, Qiao Zhengdao. Those who stayed behind would not be able to suppress the demon cave that was guarded by Yang Poyu of Hunqing sect. Huanjin sect, Lishan sect, Pingda sect, and Butian sect were on their way, but they were stopped by the elder of the Nether Spring sect, Koing Long. This person had been famous for a long time, and was of the same generation as Yuan Hongyang. He was not an easy person to deal with. Moreover, the cultivators of this sect were good at group battles, and their escape techniques were brilliant. Although they could not defeat the disciples of the four sects, it would not be difficult for them to delay them for a while. If that was indeed the true acupuncture point, the Devil's sect would have won a breather, and it would be enough for them to set up a restrictive formation there. At that time, it would be much more difficult for them to break in. Zhang Yan pondered deeply and decided that he could not let them set up the defensive array. However, among all the sects, he was the only one who had the ability to attack this place and was not far from it. However, the plan to wipe out the demon cave in front of Qinsang School was a set plan, and he could not just ignore it. Therefore, the only way was to split up. His eyes flashed and he called Han Wonka to his side. He took out a talisman and handed it to him, saying, "Senior Marshal Brother Han, the situation has changed. We can't act according to the original plan. We need to split up and attack. You lead all your disciples to the Devil's Lair west of Fenglai at top speed. You must stop the Devil's sect from building the formation before the four sects arrive. Anyone who disobeys will be punished. If you disobey, you will be punished severely." Han Wonka hesitated for a while, then he took the talisman and said, "If I take everyone away, what about Junior Marshal Brothers' side? How many people do we need to keep?" "There's no need for that." Zhang Yan's voice was calm, yet it revealed peerless confidence. "I alone am sufficient." Judging from the letter just now, Xiao Zhengdao and the other four were traveling at an extremely fast speed. Presumably, it wouldn't take long for him to kill his way to the Devil's Lair. If that was the case, he would have to rush there as fast as he could. The others might not be able to keep up. Furthermore, those 5 people were from the Celestial Sect of Wonders. If he was included. Even if 6 Yuanying Stage 3 cultivators were to attack a single Devil's Cave, even if there was no one else, their strength would still be sufficient. Zhang Yan was the one in charge. Since he had made the decision, Han Wonka could only obey. He solemnly bowed and said, "Junior brother, take care." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Senior Marshal Brother should be careful too." The current situation was rather tense. They couldn't delay any longer here, so all of them dispensed with the formalities of bidding farewell. Not long after, bright nether heavenly lake surged with light that was like smoke, and then over 100 people flew out on Starhub flying palaces, and they split apart the wind and clouds as they headed towards the south in a mighty manner. At this moment, Zhang Yan also flew out of the cave abode. In midair, he looked back. This battle could be said to be the most direct clash between the mystical and demonic sects in thousands of years. He didn't know how many people would be able to return here again. But in an instant, he retracted his gaze and shook his sleeves. In an instant, a sword hum resounded through the sky. Brilliant sword light surged up and wrapped around his body. Then, he turned into a shocking rainbow and sped towards the west. In the west of the Phoenix Comes Mountain, Yang Poyu sat on a cloud raft in the sky. Looking at the spiritual light that connected heaven and earth, even with his shrewdness, he couldn't help but feel excited. This time, he succeeded in his plan, causing Yuan Yang, Taihao, and Nan Hua to have no time to deal with him. This gave him enough time to set up the formation. However, it didn't mean that he could sit back and relax. Although there was no one to disturb him at this moment, it was because Yuan Yang's sect, which was close at hand, believed that this was a fake cave and didn't want to waste their strength for nothing. However, with the flow of spiritual opportunity, at most a day later, Taoist grotto heaven of Xianmen would be able to completely distinguish the real from the fake. At that time, they would definitely attack at all costs, and even the cultivators of Taihao and Nanhua would come together. According to the prediction of Taoist grotto heaven of devil sects, it would take at least 2 days for the spirit cave to finally condense. Therefore, he only needed to wait until then and he could use this opportunity to form a grotto heaven in one go. At this moment, a spiritual light flew over. An elder saw it and stretched out his hand to receive it. He opened it and suddenly said loudly, "Eldest senior martial brother, things are not good. The cultivators of Qinsang School are coming here for some reason." Yang Poi was shocked and said, "Are you sure?" The elder Daoran said, "This letter was sent by junior martial brother Jean, there shouldn't be any mistake." Yang Poyu secretly frowned, but his expression didn't change. He said in a low voice, Zhang Yan is good at sword escape. It won't take long for him to come to my place. It seems that I have to deal with him personally. The elder was stunned, then he hurriedly bowed and said, yes, I was impatient and didn't explain clearly. The letter said that Zhang Yan went north alone and didn't go with his sect. Yang Poyu was a little surprised, but then he felt relieved. Zhang Yan was the number one in sword fighting among the 18 sections. Ever since he took charge, the Devil's sect had never taken advantage of him. If he fought against him, he didn't have much confidence. However, if he only needed to deal with his sect, it would be much easier. Another elder on the side said, eldest senior martial brother, Zhang Yan has a high chance of becoming a heavenly grotto heaven in the future. Right now, it's a mistake for him to go north alone. If the Blood Soul sect can take this opportunity to eliminate him, we can eliminate a great enemy for our spirit sect. Yang Poyu sneered and said, since Zhang Yan dares to go alone, he must have something up his sleeve. He might even have a true weapon given to him by the sect. When everyone heard this, their expressions immediately became serious. This was the first time the Black and Devil sects had fought in thousands of years, so of course they would use their own methods. Even Yang Poyu had brought a lot of good things with him. It wasn't impossible for a profound sect like the Qinsang school to have true weapons. The elder chuckled and said, no matter how powerful this person is, Adept Bailey will deal with him. We don't need to worry about him for now. No matter how fast the Qinsang school cultivators are, it will take them at least a day and a night to get here. It's enough for us to set up a formation at the entrance of the spirit cave. Yang Poyu nodded and said, that's right. This time, we're not going to fight with the profound sect, but to guard the spirit cave. There's no need to fight them head-on, we just need to guard the entrance. As everyone spoke, a ray of light flew out from the ground. Then, a cultivator landed on the altar and said excitedly, eldest senior martial brother, the disciples of the sect have found the place to gather qi in the spirit cave. Yang Poyu's spirit was lifted. He suddenly stood up and said, quickly lead the way. The Taoist said, please follow me, senior martial brother. After he finished speaking, he immediately leaped into the air and went into the place where the ray of light was gushing out. Yang Poyu tapped his feet and a white qi cage surrounded his body. He followed closely behind. At the same time, more than 20 rays of light flew out from the altar and followed closely behind. After everyone went underground, they each performed their supernatural powers and flew along the spirit vein. After traveling for about an hour, the disciple landed at a place where spiritual vigor was swirling. He pointed to the front and said, eldest senior martial brother, this is it. Yang Poyu took a step forward and looked ahead. He saw that there was an unfathomable deep cave in front of him. Rays of light came from all directions and rushed into the cave with great momentum. The spiritual vigor here was a few times richer than the place where he cultivated in the past. In an instant, he was slightly dazed. There was a strange feeling in the unseen world that resonated with the qi dynamic around him. It seemed that as long as he stepped into the cave, he would be able to achieve a cave. However, he knew that it was far from the right time. He took a deep breath and suppressed the churning qi in his chest. He stood still and did not move. Although everyone was from the Devil's sect, most of them had not entered the spirit eye before. Today was also the first time they saw such a scene. There were two elders who could not resist the surrounding spiritual vigor. They greedily inhaled a few mouthfuls. This action was immediately noticed by Yang Poyu. His expression changed and he said, no. However, it was too late. The aura of these two people merged with the spiritual vigor. Instantly, countless spiritual qi swept over and with a bang, the two of them were sucked in. Yang Poyu waved his sleeve and a grayish-white fog appeared. It shrouded the place where the two of them were. Although his reaction was fast, he was still a step too late. He only managed to save one of them. The other did not even have the time to make a sound. In an instant, the spiritual vigor was sucked into a pile of minced meat. Yang Poyu grunted and tossed the elder, who was still in a state of shock, to the side. Then he ordered. Unless you're at the third level of the nascent soul realm, you're not allowed to go any further, and you're not allowed to adjust your breathing here. Although the spirit cave was out, it was still absorbing the spiritual qi that had been accumulated underground for a long time. It was not completely condensed yet. At this moment, if one were to cultivate and breathe in the spiritual qi, it would be equivalent to using one's own strength to fight against the vast surging force. If one's cultivation was not enough, he would immediately be torn apart. At the same time, Xiao Jingdao and the rest had been traveling at high speed underground for more than an hour. They had already entered the depths of the ground and were getting closer to the place where the devil cave condensed qi. They did not meet with any obstructions during this journey. The smoothness of the journey had exceeded the 5 people's expectations. However, at this moment, Xiao Jingdao felt that something was wrong. He suddenly stopped and looked around vigilantly. The 4 people behind him saw this and stopped as well. Sure, Han asked in surprise, "Senior brother, what's the matter? Is there something wrong?" Xiao Jingdao looked around and said with a grave expression, "Just now, there seems to be someone spying on us." Shi Muhua smiled and said, "Brother Qiao, in order to deal with the Qinsang school's attack, the devil's sect must have spent most of their strength on the surface. Even if there are disciples of the devil's sect here, there is no need to pay much attention to them. Why don't we take advantage of the fact that the power of the talisman has not dissipated to quickly find the location of the spirit cave?" Xiao Jingdao did not relax and said, "No, the devil's sect has been preparing for many years. They will not be unprepared. I'm afraid our whereabouts have already been discovered by them. We need to be extra careful on the way down." As soon as he finished speaking, a loud laugh suddenly came from the stone platform in the distance. "Brother Qiao is indeed a disciple of the Yuanyang sect. I have long wanted to meet you." Shi Muhua was startled. He looked towards the direction of the voice and shouted, "Who is there?" A bloody light flashed in front of them. A figure appeared and stood on the stone cliff. His figure was tall and straight like a pine tree, but his appearance was gentle and beautiful. His skin was like jade and he looked like a virgin. He bowed to the 5 people and said, "Brothers, Bailey Qingyin has been waiting for you." Chapter 828. Qiao Jingdao glanced at Bailey Qingyin, stopped the few people behind him who were about to make a move, and said calmly, "No need to panic, there is no trace of this person within 15 miles. In front of us is only a blood soul." Bailey Qingyin was surprised, and said, "Fellow Taoist Qiao has good eyesight." When Shi Muhua heard that this Bailey Qingyin in front of him was actually a blood soul doppelganger, his heart shuddered. The opponent's Taoist technique had undoubtedly reached an extremely high realm. Just now when he used his qi to distinguish, he actually couldn't tell the real from the fake. But Xiao Jingdao being able to tell the ins and outs in one go shocked him even more. After a cultivator reached the 3rd level of the nascent soul realm, if he wanted to observe the qi activity within a radius of a few miles or even further, he would first have to trap the other party in the heaven and earth shackle technique. However, he actually didn't notice any changes in qi activity before this. Now that he carefully examined again, he discovered that there was a strand of qi hovering above his head, but it didn't descend. This was clearly the person who cast the art had reached an extremely high realm of freely controlling the art. He couldn't help but say, "Master, senior brother seems to be inferior to this Qiao Jingdao." Qiao Jingdao's gaze was level at this moment, and he said in a low voice, "Bailey Qingyin, I actually hope that you are near, so that I can immediately raise my sword to kill you." At his realm, Yuanyang sect's sword of fate could produce 12 sword lights. Within this little distance, even if Bailey Qingyin split his spirit to block, it would be absolutely too late. Bailey Qingyin laughed loudly, his voice incomparably loud, "I am very willing to experience fellow Taoists' brilliance, I will wait for you all ahead." Qiao Jingdao didn't answer, and with a wave of his hand, dozens of sword lights burst out like sparks. Bailey Qingyin smiled, and didn't block, allowing the sword lights to fall on his body. In just an instant, this blood soul was twisted and scattered. Shi Han moved forward, and asked with a slightly worried expression, "Senior brother, our whereabouts have been discovered. What should we do next?" Shi Muhua interrupted, "Since the devil's sect has already noticed us, then we can't walk along the spirit veins, this way we can avoid their eyes and ears." When Master Han Shan and his wife heard this, they felt that it was not a bad idea. They had the earthly divine talisman with them, and those hard rocks were not an obstacle to them. As long as he burrowed in, even if the devil's sect disciples investigated, they would not be able to find any clues. Although this was slower, it was safer. However, Qiao Zhengdao said, "I don't think there's a need for this." There was no need for him to appear here. He could just attack directly. Just now, it was probably just a bluff. There were thousands and tens of thousands of ravines underground, with hundreds of twists and turns. Without the earthly divine talisman, it would be extremely difficult to find the way out. However, this talisman could only last for half an hour. If they took a detour, who knew if they would be able to reach the devil's cave in time? We must not be deterred by it and miss the best opportunity. Shi Han and his wife looked at each other and said in unison, "Eldest brother is right." Although Shi Muhua didn't agree with him, the three Yuan Yang sect disciples were the leaders, and Yuan Zirong never said anything about this kind of thing, so he had to keep quiet. After the five of them came to an agreement. Using the earthly divine talisman, they did not dodge or hide, as if they had nothing to worry about, and went straight to the place where the spiritual vigor was the strongest. At this moment, Bailey Qingyin was sitting in the depths of the spirit cave, feeling the surging spiritual vigor around him, as if there was some kind of attraction to him. Although he looked calm on the surface, there were waves in the depths of his heart. A few years ago, Hunqing sect's spiritual master Huan proposed to deliberately release the news to lure the three sects to the north. The other four sects' spiritual masters thought it was feasible. However, this matter was, after all, complicated. If the Blood Soul sect did not agree, the other sects would not purposely suppress it. However, there was a dispute within the Blood Soul sect. In the end, when Qingxiang stood against the majority, and thought that with Bailey Qingyin's talent, there was no need to rush for success. Even without the help of the Devil's Cave, he would still have a great opportunity to become a grotto heaven. And the true cave in the north seemed to be a great opportunity, but in fact, there was a hidden danger. The west and south were empty caves, and even if they could not stop Shaoqing and Yuxiao sects, Nether Spring and Jiuling sects could still retreat in time. However, the Blood Soul sect had to fight Qinsang alone, because there was too little time to set up the formation, and the advantage they had was not big, and they might not be able to defend the spirit cave. Since that was the case, it was better to sell a favor to the Hunqing sect, and ask for some benefits from the other four sections. Before the trip, when Qingxiang specially told Bailey Qingyin that if he could not win, he could give up the cave and leave, and not to be too persistent. However, Bailey Qingyin had his own plans. Comprehending the profound theory like Yuan Hongyang was a good method, but this method was too difficult. After stepping on this path, no one could say for sure if he could succeed in the end. And at this moment, the opportunity to become a grotto heaven was right in front of him. If he wanted to give it up easily, he was not willing. At most, I only need to hold this place for 3 days. If my plan succeeds, I might be able to use this to get the position of the grotto heaven. As he was thinking, a beam of light flew in the sky, and a Blood Soul sect elder stopped beside him, bowed and said, "Senior brother Bailey." After senior brother's Blood Soul appeared, Qiao Zhengdao and the others did not change their route, and are still coming here. Bailey Qingyin responded with an "oh," and a hint of admiration appeared on his face as he said, "Qiao Zhengdao is indeed the eldest disciple of the Yuanyang sect. At the critical moment, he acts decisively and has courage. Since this is the case, I will personally deal with him." That elder Daoren said, "These 5 are all heroes of Xianmen, especially that Qiao Zhengdao. Just now, I am secretly peeping through the magic treasure. Even though this person's magic power is slightly inferior, but his cultivation is not below senior brother's." "Senior brother, do you really not need our help?" Bailey Qingyin smiled and said, "I have a way to deal with him. Qinsang Zhang Yan may come at any time, time is pressing, don't worry about me later. quickly go and set up the formation. The elders stopped persuading him, and after bowing, he rode a beam of blood light and went to the surface. Qiao Jingdao and the other four rushed all the way. Even when they noticed that there were a few devil sect cultivators hiding on both sides, they did not pay any attention to them, and just kept moving forward. After another moment, there was suddenly a formation in front of them, and they had to stop. Xiao Yu looked back and said, "Eldest senior brother, do we need to take a detour?" Qiao Jingdao waved his hand, and said very calmly, "No need, even if the devil sect entered the devil's cave one step earlier than us, it is not much earlier. In such a short time, they can at most put up some formation flags. It is impossible for them to set up a powerful formation. We just need to break it." Shi Muhua took a few glances, and said with a mocking smile, "Just like what Brother Qiao said, this formation only looks powerful, but in reality, it is strong on the outside and weak on the inside. It cannot withstand a single blow. Everyone, please take a few steps back, and watch as I break it." The other four knew that he had studied formations with spiritual master Shi, and was an expert in this field, so they followed his words and retreated. Shi Muhua leaped to the front of the formation, raised 3 of his fingers, and rubbed them lightly. A cloud of smoke rose, and in mid-air, it turned into a green tree that was about 3 feet tall. Its branches and leaves were luxuriant, and it was verdant. In the crown of the tree, there were many fruits, and each of them was the size of a thumb. They looked colorful. This treasure was called the 6 Fruits Treasure Tree. Although it was not a true weapon, it was still quite rare. There were 6 different kinds of fruits on it, and each of them could break a Dao technique. He shook the tree lightly, and many of the green fruits on the tree fell. Then, he pointed forward, and said, "Go." The green fruits all flew into the formation, but a moment later, dozens of green lightning bolts exploded in the formation. After the lightning exploded, it turned into countless small lightning bolts, and their power didn't decrease at all. In just a dozen breaths, there were tens of thousands of them, causing the ground to rumble. After a while, he shook the green tree and kept it. At this moment, the formation in front of them was completely destroyed, and many broken formation flags could be seen scattered around. He smiled in satisfaction, and made an inviting gesture, saying, "Everyone, you can move forward." Since the obstacle in front of them was gone, the 5 of them went on their way again. However, this time, after a while, their bodies all shook, and their faces showed a look of pity. It was because the mana of the divine talisman of earth was exhausted. Qiao Jingdao's cultivation was the highest among the 5 of them. He silently sensed for a moment, and said, "Everyone, we are not far from that demon cave." But even so, it was inconvenient without the talisman. After walking around in the ravines and caves for about 100 miles, they saw a mass of blood cloud in front of them, and it blocked the way. The 5 of them had no choice but to stop again. Shi Muhua identified for a moment, and said, "This is not a formation, but more like a powerful magical power." Qiao Jingdao looked ahead, and said in a deep voice, "I can't sense where this mass of blood cloud is. To be able to spread the magical power so far in one breath, I'm afraid only Bailey Qingyin can do it." After the 5 of them discussed for a while, they could not recognize what kind of magical power or Dao technique this was. Searching their memories, they could not find any clues, and their hearts sank. If they were fighting elsewhere, they would definitely observe carefully. If they were not sure, they would rather retreat than go forward rashly. But it was different now. Their goal here was to suppress the spirit cave, so they could not retreat no matter what, and they had to finish the battle quickly, because the longer they delayed, the more disadvantageous it would be for them. And Blood Soul Sect's side was waiting at ease, taking advantage of their weakness, and their advantage was not just a little bit. Qiao Jingdao said in a deep voice, "There is only Bailey Qingyin's aura inside. This mass of blood cloud is some kind of trick, the 5 of us can give it a try." Shi Muhua said, "Daoist Qiao is right. We are already here, how can we be scared off by this? We have to go forward and fight." Shi Hanshan lowered his head in thought, and said, "Eldest senior brother, instead of the 5 of us going forward together, why don't we husband and wife go forward first? If there are any accidents, senior brother and 2 fellow Taoists can also provide support in time. Shi Muhua immediately denied, and said, "No, we are small in number. If we are scattered, it is very likely that we will be defeated one by one." Yuan Zirong, however, smiled, and said, "There is no need for the 2 of you to personally take the risk. Watch this little brother perform the technique." He flicked his sleeve, and a clear aura flew out, landing on the ground and turning into a white dog with a short tail and thin waist. The dog shook its body, and softly barked at him twice, then stepped on the cloud and rushed forward into the formation. After Southern Flower Sect cultivators reached the 3rd stage of the Yuanying realm, they could bring along 18 kinds of strange beasts. At this time, it was not like when they had just entered the Yuanying realm, where they could only barely control them and could not use their full power. Instead, they could fuse their essence into their bodies, and when they fought, they could even borrow 1 or 2 of their magical powers. Very few outsiders could understand the ins and outs of them. The white dog entered the blood cloud in the blink of an eye. After waiting for a long time, Yuan Zirong suddenly had a look of surprise, and said to himself, "Strange." Chapter 829. Yuan Zirong's mind was connected with the strange beast he rode, so even if it suffered any damage, he would know it clearly. Just now, the white dog was specially used to probe the enemy, but after walking 1 round in the blood cloud, it didn't detect anything strange. He didn't believe that the other party didn't use any tricks, so it could only be that he didn't understand. He thought to himself, "What a pity, if I brought the 100 artful bird this time, I might be able to see through the truth of this blood cloud." In his own beast park, he had over 100 different kinds of spirit essences that had been refined. When he fought with others, the strange beasts he brought along could be changed according to the opponent. Although he only brought 18 of them every time, it was difficult for others to know the exact details of them when they changed. And among them, the 100 artful bird could communicate with gods and spirits, but it didn't have the ability to fight. Because of the surprise attack on the Devil's Cave, he didn't bring it, but now he was a little regretful. Seeing that he didn't speak for a long time, Shi Muhua stepped forward and asked, "Fellow Yuan, how is it?" Yuan Zirong didn't answer first, but sent a message in his heart. The white dog walked 1 round, but still didn't have the slightest clue, so he shook his head and truthfully told the 4 the situation. Qiao Jingdao pondered for a while, then leaped up, transforming into a beam of golden light that soared into the sky. He circled around the blood cloud and saw countless spiritual qi flying over, like 100 rivers flowing into the sea, gathering within. He guessed that there must be a large cave below that led straight to where the spirit cave was. But other than that, there was no other way around. After he returned to his original position, he said in a deep voice, "We don't have time to waste here, even if Bailey Qingyin laid a trap, we still have to go in." Shi Muhua knew that he was right. Unless they chose to retreat now, they would have to go in, so she said, "Fellow Qiao, with the 5 of us together, even if the Devil's Sect has tricks, we should be able to deal with it." Shi Hanshan and his wife also agreed. This time, they came to redeem themselves, so they were naturally willing to listen to Qiao Jingdao's instructions, not to mention that they also had secret treasures given by the sect, so if they encountered a dangerous situation, they would have a chance to escape. At this time, Yuan Zirong waved his hand, and a dog bark was heard. The white-haired dog had already run out of the blood cloud. Seeing that the dog was unharmed, Shi Hanshan relaxed slightly. He smiled and said, "Looks like it's the same as when we came here just now. It's just a bluff." Qiao Jingdao's expression was still grave. He raised his sleeve and took out a dagger. With a flash of brilliant light, it transformed into a small boat. He said, "Follow me." With that, he boarded the boat. The 4 of them boarded the boat as instructed. Qiao Jingdao looked at the 4 people and said, "I've just now probed. This blood cloud spread out for about 30 miles, but even if Bailey Qingyin's magic power is superb, the upper and lower boundary will not exceed 50 miles. With a little effort, we can rush over. If we encounter danger later, don't move recklessly, I will block the way. Fellow Daoist Shi, fellow Daoist Yuan, you 2 guard the left and right sides." Junior Marshal Brother Xiao, you and your sister-in-law stay behind. After giving the instructions, he flipped his palm and adjusted his magic power. Clusters of clouds gushed out from the bottom of the golden boat under his feet. He pushed the boat forward and charged into the blood cloud. But after a breath's time, the golden boat unceremoniously broke through the blood cloud and charged inside. The 5 of them looked around. What entered their eyes was a blood aura that was bright red like the sunset. In the distance, there were even wisps of light flashing, dazzling everyone's eyes and brows into a scarlet color. Qiao Zhengdao caught a wisp of aura, and after a slight identification, he frowned slightly. Seeing this, Yuan Zirong hurriedly said, Senior Marshal Brother Qiao, there's filthy aura hidden in this blood cloud, but it can't do anything to us. Qiao Zhengdao nodded. If this filthy aura was a first or second tier Yuanian cultivator, it would inevitably affect them. But the 5 of them were all Dharmakayas, so they weren't afraid. It was no wonder that Yuan Zirong didn't mention it just now. His gaze swept around, and after trying his best to sense, he discovered that there wasn't a single person's aura in this area. He said, be careful. Waiting for everyone to agree, he shouted. The golden boat was activated by magic power, and its speed doubled, shooting downwards like an arrow leaving the bow. At this moment, in the depths of the blood cloud, there was a lonely and spacious place. A wisp of blood smoke curled upwards, and when it reached a height of 1,000 feet, it condensed into the shape of a lotus flower. Bailey Qingyin, dressed in a large red blood robe, was sitting on top. The moment the 5 of them barged in, his originally still body trembled slightly. His eyes widened, and he stood up with a flick of his sleeves. He gazed in the direction of the few people, his eyes revealing light as he laughed loudly, finally fell into my trap. Although his magic power was profound in this generation, and he didn't think of himself as second, he wasn't someone who fought recklessly. Qiao Zhengdao and the other 4 were the best of the best. On a normal day, any one of them could fight him, and even if they could win, it wouldn't be an easy task. But if the 5 of them joined forces, even if they didn't use any great spells, as long as they took turns to use the heaven and earth lock technique, he wouldn't be able to free himself and could only try to retreat. However, once they entered the blood cloud, the situation could be reversed. He had specially asked Wen Qingxiang to make this item, and used millions of precious materials and rare medicines to refine it into a fragment of a magic treasure. It was called Blood Jade Smoke Net Qi, and it could be used to set up a mysterious place that seemed like a formation, but wasn't. If someone entered this place, without special means, they wouldn't be able to get out. In the past, Spiritual Master Ru Huang had this item in his magic treasure, and he often used it to hunt and kill cultivators. However, to use this treasure, one needed to practice a method that was compatible with it. Otherwise, one wouldn't be able to control it. In this generation, there were only 2 people who could practice this method, and he was one of them. With this kind of magical item, he had the confidence to fight against the several Xian Gate disciples who came to attack. However, with his cultivation, he could only barely control this treasure. If he wanted to fully unleash its true power, he had to reach the Grotto Heaven realm. However, the use of divine arts was endless, and it would be used differently by different people. He used this treasure to borrow its ability to trap people, but against Qiao Zhengdao and the other 4, he had another method. He looked a few more times, and thought to himself, these 5 people are gathered together, it's not easy to make a move, I'll separate them and take care of them one by one. After thinking, he aimed at the position of the 5 people, and raised a blue bead in the sky. After it spun a few times above his head, he shouted and struck down. While Qiao Zhengdao drove the boat forward, he used the heaven and earth lock technique, constantly sensing the surroundings to prevent the opponent from sneaking up on them. Even though up until now, they had still encountered obstacles, but he knew that this place was definitely not that simple. Bailey Qingyin wouldn't allow them to enter the devil's lair so easily. Yuan Zirong was standing on the left side of the boat. After he released the white-haired dog, he kept it by his side and didn't put it away. At this moment, the white dog's ears suddenly stood up, and then it barked twice towards the sky. His expression changed, and without saying anything, he threw up a black scale. After it went up, it was like dissolving ink, and became a dense ball of 50 feet in size, blocking everyone under it. But just now, after doing this, there was a cracking sound above his head, and the scale immediately shattered. Then, a jade bead the size of a longan, flickering with a blue luster, fell down. Shi Muhua took a look, and his expression changed greatly, saying, "Not good, it's the first Yang Calamity bead. Quickly dodge." Finished speaking, he immediately dodged to the side. This bead was an extremely famous magic treasure in the Shuepa sect. Once it was shot out, it had no power beyond 30 feet. Even if a normal Yuanying cultivator made a move, it could be easily knocked away. But if it flew into the inner circle and resonated with the qi of the living, it would immediately produce infinite power. Even if the defensive treasure of the opposite side was a profound weapon, it could still be smashed on the spot. And at this moment, none of the 5 people wanted to use their own magic treasures to see if they could block this treasure, so the only way was to dodge. Immediately, 5 rays of light leapt up from the boat, and spread out according to the previously agreed position. Just as they left, there was a crack sound, and the golden boat was smashed into pieces. The blue jade bead turned in mid-air, no longer attacking, but slowly hid in the blood mist, and disappeared. After Qiao Jingdao retreated from the boat, he originally wanted to immediately rendezvous with the other 4, but after moving forward for 1,000 feet, he still couldn't see their figures. Suddenly feeling that something was wrong, he used his heart to sense for a while, but even the qi of the living had disappeared. His heart couldn't help but sink, and he thought to himself, just now when that calamity bead attacked, I actually didn't sense anything at all, there must be something strange about this blood cloud. His thoughts turned, and he took out a talisman. With a light flick, it immediately ignited, and not only did it emit a bright brilliance, there were also wisps of green smoke coming out. Wherever it went, the blood cloud retreated as if it had met its natural enemy, and not long after, the fog within 1,000 feet was cleared away. He looked carefully a few times, and then waved his sleeves again, and walked forward. On the blood lotus, Bailey Qingyin saw the situation clearly, and raised his eyebrows, saying, "Righteous talisman?" The battle in the Devil's Cave here wasn't like the one in the Star Stone last time, where both sides couldn't use many of their methods. In some cases, besides divine abilities and Taoist techniques, they also needed to compete with talismans and tools. The side with the slightly weaker foundation of the sect, with a single mistake, could easily suffer a great loss. Xiao Jingdao's talisman was bestowed by the heavenly abode of the sect. Holding it in his hand, before the talisman paper burned out, all evil would be repelled, and the devilish qi would be cleansed. No bewildering method would be able to sway one's will. He was well aware that since he came to this blood cloud, he had entered the place where Bailey Qingyin was in charge, and if they fought, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. At this moment, only by finding the 4 people who came with him could he have a chance of winning. Not only him, the Shi couple, Shi and Yuan also sensed something was wrong at this moment, and one after another, they used their various methods, and for a moment, a large part of the blood cloud was dispersed. Bailey Qingyin didn't stop them, and instead smiled faintly. Compared to these 5 people, he had the advantage of knowing in advance that the disciples of the 3 sects would come to attack, so he was already prepared for this battle. Even if the 5 people gathered again, he still had a way to disperse them. At this moment, the more the other side exposed their methods, the more advantageous it was for him to come down and attack. But just at this moment, a letter flew over. He received it, and his expression couldn't help but change slightly. How did they come so quickly? He crushed the letter, and cast his fierce gaze downwards. I need to quickly take down these people. Chapter 830. After Bailey Qingyin made up his mind, he immediately sat down cross-legged and looked down, slowly circulating his mana. As time passed, the entire blood cloud suddenly surged, and then there was a patter of blood rain. He spent a lot of effort to invite the 5 of them here. His goal was not to kill them, but to use a great divine ability. If he was lucky enough to succeed, he wouldn't be afraid no matter how many people came to attack. He could drag it out until the moment the spirit cave formed, then he could use it to break through the cave. This technique was called borrowing object to substitute form. With a turn of the divine ability, he could transfer all of the enemy's attacks to others, toying with them in the palm of his hand. Although it looked powerful, there was a harsh condition, and that was to use spell scrolls on the substitute form. However, spell scrolls were extremely eye-catching, and they flew slowly. Anyone could see through them with a single glance and dodge them in advance. As a result, even though the upper echelon cultivators of Blood Soul sect had dabbled in this technique, they rarely used it in battle because there were too many flaws in it. However, what Bailey Qingyin used today was different. With the help of Blood Jade Smoke Net, he could turn spell scrolls into blood rain. Not only was it unavoidable, but it was also hidden deeply, making it hard to detect the profoundness within. However, he also understood that with the Five's experience in battle, it would be very difficult to use this technique right from the start. According to his wishes, he wanted to slowly test the waters, and when they were tired and weak, he would suddenly make his move. However, he didn't think that Zhang Yan would come too quickly and disrupt his plans. According to what was written in the letter, it would take at most an hour for him to arrive here. Even if there were people of the same sect on the surface in charge of defending, due to the lack of time, it was difficult to set up any powerful formations. Against normal cultivators, it was fine, but against someone like Zhang Yan, it wouldn't be able to stop him for long. Bailey Qingyin's eyes were cold. Since the safe method wasn't feasible, he could only take the risk. As Qiao Jingdao was advancing, he suddenly felt something was wrong. Looking up, he saw blood threads floating down from the sky. However, when they reached 1,000 feet away, they were blocked by the clear light of the righteous god talisman, turning into smoke and dissipating. However, his expression sank. With his cultivation, even if there was a slight change in spiritual opportunity, he could immediately sense it. He could sense it immediately, but here, he only noticed it when it was above his head. It was still manageable for now, but once the talisman burned out, it would definitely be strenuous to deal with it. The only way was to find a way to kill the person controlling the blood cloud. Only then could he get out of this situation. He pondered for a moment, and then his body shook. A wisp of smoke appeared above his head, and a large steel emerged from within. On the steel, a male and female pair of swords were intertwined, and their auras were intertwined. This steel was known as the Boundary Mountain Sword Steel. The inner space was a world of its own. Once the opponent's aura was gathered, as long as the opponent was within 50 miles, they could be dragged into the steel to fight. Once the Yuanyang sect's cultivators entered the inner area, their magical powers would be strengthened by at least 30%, and it would be almost impossible for them to lose. Bailey Qingyin saw everything clearly from the outside. She saw Qiao Jingdao's entire body was surrounded by golden sword aura. It was like a ball of fire, its brilliance shining out for over 1,000 feet. He couldn't help but frown. The sword steel was indeed a huge threat. If he used Dao techniques and divine arts, it was inevitable that some of his qi activity would leak out. If it was absorbed, it would accumulate. It was inevitable that he would lose this opportunity, so he decided to hide his qi activity as much as possible, and temporarily not provoke this person. As for the other people in the blood cloud, they all had different reactions when they noticed the blood rain falling. Shi Muhua of Taihao School only looked at it coldly. With a look of disdain on his face, he suddenly let out a shout. First, a strong wind surged around his body, repelling the rain outside. Then, he spread out his hand, and a ray of spiritual light shot out from his palm. Then, a green bamboo appeared. Its leaves were green, and its branches were tender. In just a few breaths, it had grown to a height of 100 feet. He spread out his sleeves, and his body turned into a beam of green light, entering the inner space. This object was called Longevity Bamboo, one of the 3 treasures of Taihao School's Duguang Mountain. It was divided into 100 segments, 1,000 segments, and 10,000 segments. This one of his was called the 100-segment bamboo. If a person hid in it, they could only defend, but not attack. When magical treasures came, they could at most hit one segment, and after 100 hits, they could completely break it. However, after the battle, even if there was only one segment left, if he took it back and used the spiritual liquid to nourish it, it could still grow back in a month. This treasure was precious, and before he left, he picked 2 and hid them on him. However, he couldn't tell what was wrong with this blood rain, so he would rather hide inside than be contaminated by it. On his other side, Nanhua Sek's Yuan Zirong saw the blood rain, and he was extremely carefree. He smiled, and with a light flick of his finger, countless white feathers surrounded him like snow. Although the rain was dense, it couldn't enter. At the same time, he made a hand sign, and a black-scaled python slowly crawled out from the cloud under his feet. It was 100 feet long, and on its head was a blood-red crown, which was bright and eye-catching. In the depths of the crown, there was a green toad the size of a fist. Its bright eyes kept moving, and it looked very intelligent. As soon as these 2 beasts came out, he placed them in front to scout the way, and then he identified a direction and moved forward at a moderate speed. He hadn't taken more than 100 steps when he heard swishing sounds by his ears, and countless ghost blood arrows shot at him. He couldn't help but smile. "I was waiting for you." Among the 5 of them, he seemed to have the least opinions of his own, but he was much more daring. At this moment, he intentionally didn't use any treasures to block, and he swaggered forward with the intention of luring the opponent to attack, and then fighting him. Before the blood arrows arrived, the python on the ground coiled its body, and it coiled vertically in front of him, and it relied on its hard scales to block all the arrows. At this moment, a silver hook floated out from the blood cloud behind him, and after swaying a few times, it suddenly flashed, and turned into a flowing light. Yuan Zirong didn't seem to notice it, and he actually didn't move at all. The green toad croaked loudly, and it suddenly swelled up. It suddenly leaped up from the python's crown, and it swallowed the long hook in one gulp. After that, it called out twice on its master's shoulder as if it was asking for credit. Yuan Zirong waited for a while, and when he didn't see anyone coming to attack, he smiled lightly, and continued to fly in the direction he originally came from. Just now, after the Sure couple got off the flying boat, they wanted to meet up with the other 4, but after searching for a long time, they still couldn't find them. They also guessed that there was something strange about this blood cloud. Xiao Yu's expression became slightly tense, and she pulled on Shi Hanshan's sleeve. "Husband, our cultivation is not comparable to eldest senior brother, and we are also slightly weaker than fellow Taoists Shi and Yuan. Now that we are separated, will the people of the devil sect attack us first?" Shi Han sneered. "Don't be afraid, madam. If they dare to come, then let them have a taste of the power of our Yuan Yang sect's life-killing sword." Although that was what he said, he was still a little nervous in his heart. Right now, they could be considered to have entered the heart of the devil cave. They didn't know how many cultivators of the devil sect were here, and there should be a true cave here. If Yang Poyu, who defeated them last time, was also here, how would they fight the enemy? Last time, they relied on the treasures of the sect to escape, but this time, if the opponent had a restraining treasure, then it would be very difficult to resist. Just as they were feeling uneasy, blood shadows suddenly appeared from all 4 directions, and in a split second, more than 10 blood souls appeared and pounced towards the 2. Seeing this, Shi Han circulated his mana, and a sword plate floated up. As the clanging sounds rang out, hundreds of dazzling sword lights shot out. However, these blood souls were extremely agile. With a flash, they all turned into blood light, and in the blink of an eye, they dodged the sword lights. They rushed into the inner circle of 300 feet. Shi Han couldn't help but shiver. He hurriedly shook the sword plate, and millions of sword lights scattered, covering the surrounding area of 300 feet. These blood souls couldn't dodge for a moment, and in the blink of an eye, they were cut into pieces. Not a single trace was left. But at this moment, he suddenly heard movement in the sky. Looking up, he saw that blood rain had unknowingly fallen, and at this moment, it was already above his head. It was already too late to use the astral wind to blow it away. Fortunately, he wasn't here alone. Without waiting for instructions, Xiaoyu let out a delicate shout and took out an elegant treasured umbrella. The ribs of the umbrella opened, blocking the rain. However, she didn't notice that just now, after the ghost-headed blood arrow passed by, a bright green pearl was flying out from the blood cloud, following behind it. It had already soundlessly arrived within 300 feet. Sure, Hanshan was more vigilant. He glanced at it and exclaimed, "Pearl of disaster. Junior sister, be careful." Xiaoyu was also shocked when she heard this. She hurriedly flicked her wrist and threw out a small box. In an instant, a treasure aura covered her body, and at the same time, she lightly tapped the ground. She turned into a ray of light and dodged. Almost at the same time, the green pearl fell, and with a bang, it smashed the treasured umbrella into pieces. Then, it spun in midair and chased after her without letting go. Sure, Hanshan was anxious, and he consecutively sent out hundreds of sword lights, but they were useless against the pearl of disaster. When this pearl came close, it merged with one's aura, making it almost impossible to break. The only way to break it was to hide at a distance of 300 feet. However, Xiaoyu's escape technique was ordinary, and it was difficult to shake it off. Sure, Hanshan saw that she was in imminent danger, and he couldn't care less about his own safety. He flicked his sleeve and threw out a portrait. The person in the portrait was exactly the same as Xiaoyu. When it flew to the front, it took a step down and collided with the pearl of disaster. With a poochie sound, it instantly vanished into nothingness. Xiaoyu also took this opportunity to escape. Sure, Hanshan grabbed her hand and said, "Let's go." The husband and wife ran for several miles hand in hand. Seeing that there was no longer anything chasing after them, they finally calmed down. However, the two of them didn't notice. Just now, when they were in a hurry to dodge, a few drops of blood landed on their bodies. After a flash, they disappeared. At the same time, on the surface, Elder Tan was standing on a high hill, urging the disciples below to set up the formation faster. From time to time, he would raise his head and look toward the eastern horizon, as if he was on guard against something. After an hour, an elder flew up and said, "Martial uncle, 11 formation diagrams have been set up." Elder Tan frowned and said, "That's too little. Didn't the sect refine 20 diagrams? Why did you only bring these?" The elder smiled bitterly and said, "Martial uncle, this is already a lot. We can't just put them outside. We need to arrange them underground. Moreover, without hundreds of years of wholehearted refinement, the power of the formation will be limited. It's already not easy to take out these diagrams." Elder Tan also knew that although the range of the array diagram was not small, it mainly relied on the caster's transcendence energy to cast it. If the visitor's transcendence energy was much higher and was also proficient in array Dao, they could easily break out. Therefore, this was only a temporary measure. If they wanted to protect this place, they would have to rely on the help of a large array. He sighed and said, "Zhang Yan could arrive here at any time. I only hope that these diagrams can delay him for a while." The elder was unconvinced and said, "Martial uncle, you always say that Zhang Yan is so powerful, but today, he came alone. I don't believe that he can break through these formations." Before he finished, Elder Tan's expression suddenly froze and he raised his hand to stop him from speaking. At the same time, he raised his head and looked toward the sky. The surroundings suddenly quieted down. Everyone looked toward the sky, and not long after, they heard a rumbling sound coming from the horizon. It seemed to come from the extreme, and then it grew louder and louder. In just a few breaths, it was so loud that everyone's eardrums felt like they were going to burst. In the end, there was a sudden sound of the sky splitting. In the sky, an extremely bright sword light broke through the clouds and shot out like a meteor. In an instant, there was an overwhelming aura that shrouded the entire world. Chapter 831. The cultivators of the Shueshua sect felt the pressure of this huge aura, and their expressions changed. Facing a cultivator who might be the strongest in this generation of Xian men in terms of fighting techniques, everyone acted as if they were facing a great enemy. Around the entrance to the spirit cave, there were already thousands of low-level cultivators casting spells and waving formation flags. Below them, clouds and smoke filled the air, covering the peaks and merging with the spiritual light that shot into the sky. Looking at it, the clouds were flashing chaotically, and the fire was like a rainbow. Elder Tan knew that today's opponent was not ordinary. Although this formation looked okay, it could only block ordinary Xianmen cultivators at most. If it encountered someone with powerful magic treasures, it might not be able to resist the enemy. Only if a mountain link formation was set up outside, then it could be said to be impregnable. However, due to the lack of time, it was impossible to do that. Therefore, his expression was still tense, and his face was solemn. Because the sword light flew extremely fast, when it shot down, it drew a long rainbow from the sky to the ground. When it reached the sky, the sword light scattered, and a handsome young Taoist walked out. He wore a black cloak, and his body was surrounded by sword rainbows. The spiritual vigor around him whistled and echoed, surging and surging like the sea. Elder Tan looked at the churning high cloud beside him, and his eyelids twitched. He thought for a moment, and tilted his head slightly, and said to a disciple beside him in a deep voice, "Go and take care of the people below, and face the enemy carefully. If the enemy is strong, allow them to retreat when they can't handle it, there's no need to fight to the death." That disciple also felt the huge pressure faintly coming from the sky. When he heard this, he secretly sighed in relief, bowed, and immediately passed down the order. The elder from before walked up and said, "Uncle Master, you're here. The disciples can't use their hands and feet, please enter the formation." Elder Tan nodded, "I'll listen to apprentice nephew Meng." Using his Xianmen technique, he flew down the high hill, and retreated into the cave. Zhang Yan stood in the sky, and looked down. Seeing that the people below were already waiting in formation, he thought for a moment, flipped his hand, and took out a long awl-shaped shuttle from his sleeve. This item was shining with a dim light. There were tiny electric snakes running around its body. This was a magical treasure given to him by Sun Jinren. It was called the 10,000 Li Rainbow Splitting Awl, and it was specially used to break formations. Within it was the Xian Ming heavenly lightning formed from Sun Jinren's own billow cloud secret chi. This was the manifestation of the heavenly abode's magical arts and divine abilities. It couldn't be used at all. He might even die from not being able to suppress the magical power within. Fortunately, he had also studied the billowing cloud secret manual. He could control it with magic power of the same origin, but the secret technique of the heavenly abode master was not to be underestimated. At most, he could only unleash 10 to 20% of the treasure's power. But even so. However, it was enough to deal with the hastily erected array formation below. After operating the rainbow splitting awl in his palm for a moment, he threw it into the air. The awl body entered the air and vibrated silently. First, dark clouds and black fog gathered from all directions. The sun and the moon were gone, and the world was dark. After half a moment, it was as if it was kneaded by an invisible force. Yin and yang appeared in the sky, and black and white suddenly separated. Then, there was a strong wind, and millions of dark clouds separated, covering the sky. Each cloud had golden lightning flowing, flashing. He stood in the clouds, lifted his fluttering sleeves, and gently pressed down. Thousands of thunderbolts suddenly tore the shackles, and smashed down unscrupulously. At this moment, it was as if thousands of mountains fell from the sky. The array formation on the ground that was just made of formation flags couldn't withstand such a fierce bombardment. After a series of earth-shattering tremors, it collapsed in just a few breaths. After an entire 100 breaths of time, by the time Zhang Yan had used all the magic power in his body to retract the treasure, the lightning had already plowed through an area of a few thousand kilometers in circumference. All the hills and slopes had been razed to the ground, and only deep pits were left behind. Elder Tan's heart trembled. He didn't think that the array formation that he had hoped to delay the opponent for a moment would be broken in just one exchange. Fortunately, just now, the order was given in time. The cultivators of the sect saw that the opponent's array formation was difficult to block and hid underground. Other than the outermost layer of the formation being destroyed, they actually didn't suffer much damage. Beside him, Elder Meng came up and suggested, "Martial uncle, the talisman in Zhang Yan's hand is peerlessly powerful, and it's difficult to fight it head-on. However, it seems that he needs to first accumulate power and connect with the clear spiritual energy in the sky before he can display his power. Why don't we retreat underground and set up layers of arrays in the acupoints below? This will wear down his spirit, and at the very least, we can stop him." Elder Tan sighed, "That's the only way for now." After the group of cultivators heard the order, they didn't waste any time. The 11 elders of the Blood Soul sect immediately set up array diagrams on the path leading to the spirit cave. For a moment, more than 10 different colored spiritual lights flew and shone above the cave. After Zhang Yan forced all the cultivators of the Devil's sect to retreat underground, he didn't rush down immediately. Instead, he looked around and saw that the spiritual light above the cave seemed to be unaffected by the thunderbolts just now. It was still shining brightly. His eyes flashed slightly, and he said, "The spiritual vigor is clear and undisturbed. It seems that this is the real cave." If he only wanted to break the array, he could just use the purple heaven thunder. Using this treasure would be like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. However, the lightning contained a trace of Sun Jinren's chi. If this spirit cave was a fake one set up by the cultivators of the Devil's sect with great supernatural power, there was a high chance that it would be contaminated and reveal its flaws. However, there was no abnormality at all now. In addition to the sneak attack by the disciples of the 3 sects, there was a high chance that this was the real cave. His eyes were sharp. Since that was the case, he naturally didn't need to hold back. He flicked his sleeves and dove down on the conveyance light. However, the moment he entered the cave, there was a sudden brilliance in front of him. A Devil's sect elder with a golden ring on his head leaped out and stopped in front of him. Behind him, a array diagram was set up, and he bowed and said, "Jinren Zhang, do you dare to enter the array for a while?" Zhang Yan smiled. He had the earth escape technique, so it was possible for him to take a detour. However, although this technique was profound, its speed was far inferior to some of the more powerful escape techniques. It was even faster than if he were to attempt to break through the ground head-on. Moreover, after killing Feng Qianping, he could faintly feel that his spirit integration mysterious art was almost at the peak of the 4th tier. Moreover, it was difficult for outsiders to see the inside of the battle inside the array diagram, so he could use the demon subduing slip without hesitation to absorb the spiritual essence. Since the other party had delivered himself to his door, there was no harm in accepting it. Thus, he stepped into the array without hesitation. Seeing this, everyone let out a sigh of relief. In the array diagram, it would be difficult to break out without defeating the person in charge. Even if the intruder was a cultivator of the 3rd tier of Yuanying, it would be very difficult to break through if the person guarding the array was determined to fight. Elder Tan's seniority was extremely high, but he usually only cultivated and rarely came out, so he did not know every cultivator in the sect. He immediately asked, "Who is in the first array? What kind of technique does he have?" Elder Meng replied, reporting to Martial Uncle, "That's senior brother Sheng." The array diagram is called the 5-fish array, and there are 5 blood salamanders inside. He might be able to make Zhang Yan suffer a great loss. Elder Tan was astonished. Using the blood salamanders as a formation? This martial nephew Sheng is really willing to do so. How many years has he been raising them? Elder Meng lowered his head and said, "He has been feeding them with his blood essence for 7 years. Hearing this, Elder Tan was shocked. The blood salamanders were naturally born demonic creatures in the Yuanqi Pond, one of the Blood Soul sect's 4 ponds. However, because of their cruel nature, if a cultivator wanted to control them, they would need to feed them with their own blood essence. That was not all. Every year that these demonic creatures were raised, the cultivator would have to pay 10 years of their lifespan, but they would also become twice as ferocious as before. Raising 5 blood salamanders would mean losing 50 years of lifespan for every additional year. 7 years would be 8 years, and that would be 350 years of lifespan. Elder Tan stroked his beard and solemnly instructed, no matter how this battle ends, you must remember to take good care of this martial nephew Sheng's disciples in the future. Elder Meng immediately agreed. Elder Tan originally thought that with the help of the blood salamanders, Elder Sheng would be able to delay them for at least a quarter of an hour. However, just now, after 100 breaths had passed, there was a loud rumble as the formation cracked and the spiritual light shattered. A magnificent sword light shot out from the formation and headed straight for the second formation. The cultivators of the second formation were caught off guard and hastily fought back. However, in less than 10 breaths of time, there was another sound of the heavens splitting apart. Countless spiritual lights burst out as a sword light shot out from the formation, heading straight for the third formation. Not long after, the third formation suffered the same fate and was pierced through by the sword light. Then came the fourth formation, the fifth formation. In the next moment, Zhang Yan was like a hot knife through butter, breaking through 7 formations in a row. The formations that the elders had carefully arranged were like paper in front of him, unable to stop him in the slightest. Elder Tan was terrified. In the past, he had heard of how powerful Zhang Yan was, but now that he had seen it with his own eyes, he realized that he was even more tyrannical than the rumors said. In just a short period of time, 7 elders had died in battle, and it seemed like even their souls had not managed to escape. Seeing that the 11 formations wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer, a look of panic appeared on his face. Elder Meng also saw that the situation wasn't good and hurriedly said, "Martial uncle, I'm afraid it's not appropriate to only defend and not attack." Elder Tan hurriedly asked, "Then what do you think we should do?" Elder Meng Daoren said, "We need to send our disciples to fight him from the side, so that he can't easily break through the formation." Elder Tan was silent for a moment, then said, "Zhang Yan is a third-stage Yuanian cultivator, what use is there for ordinary disciples to fight him? It's just a suicidal move." Elder Meng Daoren said, "We can ask our third-stage Yuanian cultivators to lend a helping hand from behind to undo that forbidden lock technique." "Martial uncle, we can't care about anything else right now. Every moment we can delay is a moment. If Venerable Bailey's plan succeeds, then everything will be worth it." Seeing that Elder Tan was still hesitating, Elder Meng gritted his teeth and said, "Martial nephew is willing to bring our disciples to fight." Elder Tan took a look at him and sighed heavily, saying, "Although it's risky, it has its merits. Go, I'll ask Elder Xian to help you from behind." Elder Meng's spirit roused, and he called out to the people behind him. Immediately, 2 cultivators leaped into the air with bloody light. Elder Tan took a breath, took out a flying letter, and threw it down the cave, thinking, "Senior Brother Bailey, I can only do my best." Not long after, Bailey Qingyin, who was still fighting with the 5 people in the depths of the cave, received the letter. After reading the letter, although his expression was calm, he knew that he couldn't delay any longer. If he wanted to fight with Zhang Yan, then he had to quickly plant the divine arts on everyone, or else when the internal and external attacks came, he could only retreat in defeat. A bloody light appeared in his eyes, and a large well flew out from the top, and inside it was a pool of thick blood water. This object was bestowed by the blood pool in the sect, after being refined by its owner. As long as the blood water didn't dry up, his mana wouldn't be exhausted, and this one mouthful was enough for him to squander for more than a day. With the help of the blood well, his mana was abundant, and he could move freely. With a clear shout, 5 blood souls that looked exactly like him flew out from his body, and with the sound of astral winds, they each charged towards their target. Chapter 832. Elder Meng and the other 2 flew up into the sky. Each of them held their magic treasures in their hands and stared at the ground below with serious expressions. At this moment, Zhang Yan had already rushed into the 8th diagram array. Judging from the previous situation, they believed that this array would not be able to hold on for long. They could only wait for him to rush out and try to fight him. Only then would they be able to delay him. After a few dozen breaths, the outcome of the battle had been decided. With a loud bang, the array diagram, which was about 10 miles in circumference, exploded into pieces, and a sharp sword light pierced through it, leaving a long trail of qi behind it. It rushed towards the 9th array diagram without the slightest hesitation. When Elder Mang and the other two saw this, how could they allow him to do this? They shouted and threw down the magic treasures in their hands. As Zhang Yan was flying, he suddenly felt something was wrong. He glanced at it, but his momentum did not change. He stretched out his hand from his sleeve and casually flicked his finger in the direction of the three people. Rumble. Countless small 5 elements devil-slaying lightning shot out from his fingertips. Before the 3 falling lights could even get close to him, they were blocked by the layers of lightning. Then, they were hit until they wailed and trembled. After a while, there was a series of explosions, and their lights were all dissipated. They turned into fragments and fell to the ground. Seeing that the magic treasures were destroyed, but they could not stop Zhang Yan even by half a step, Elder Meng was shocked and angry. At this moment, he did not care about anything else. He steeled his heart and said, "2 junior brothers, be careful." He quickly took out a jade bottle from his sleeve and threw it down. A white light sank and landed on a hard rock. With a crackling sound, a pool of thick black water came out. When this water came into contact with the surrounding spirit chi, it made a woo-woo sound. Between heaven and earth, there was a whistling gale. Inside, there were countless sparkling and translucent red sands swirling. At the side, there was a profound pillar that had been underground for who knows how many years. With just a light brush, a layer of it immediately disappeared. After throwing this item, Elder Meng did not even look at the result. He hastily retreated more than 10 miles and took out a protective magic treasure to protect himself. The water in the bottle was called Return of the Dragon. When it came into contact with spirit chi, it would turn into a strong wind that could harm a flood dragon. In addition, there were 10,000 pieces of blood fiend Yin sand inside. The moment the magic treasure of the Celestial Sect of Wonders came into contact with it, it would immediately be tainted. It would not be long before it would be worn away. It was most suitable to be used to deal with the cultivators of the Celestial Sect of Wonders. In fact, he still had a hidden killer move. If it was a normal time, it was actually not difficult to deal with this Yin wind. But once the Yin wind intertwined with the chi of the spirit point, the chi of the spirit point would explode. If one were to attempt to stop it with supernatural powers or Taoist techniques, it would be equivalent to going against the spiritual vigor that was flowing, and one's mana would be slightly insufficient. He would be pulled into it and crushed to pieces. When Elder Tan saw this from behind the formation, he was also shocked. The Yin wind did not differentiate between friend and foe. Even though he was not afraid of his Dharma treasures being tainted, he was afraid that the blood sand would attack him. He hastily took out a jade shell and covered it with one hand. Suddenly, a dense light rose from his body and shrouded the thousands of disciples behind him. In the tunnel of the cave, the wind soon filled the heaven and earth. Zhang Yan was the first to bear the brunt. He could see that the blood sand was strange and seemed to have the ability to taint it. He did not use any magic treasure but gently raised his hand. Within a radius of 10 miles, there was immediately a strong wind, trying to push it away. However, when the chi dynamic came into contact with it, he suddenly felt a strong chi dynamic wrapped around his body, as if it wanted to swallow him. If it was someone else, he might have fallen into the trap. However, this time, he did not know how many cultivators of the devil's doctrine he would have to face. Zhang Yan knew that he had to do his best. In order to have a few more methods to protect himself, he had to travel with his body. At this moment, he shouted and activated the mysterious art of comprehending spirit and stopped his body. Then, he circulated all the mana in his body and waved his sleeve. It gathered into a huge spiritual vigor and slapped down. It actually suppressed the Yin wind that had already formed momentum. Elder Mang and the others were dumbfounded. Behind them, a junior martial brother was scared witless. He murmured, "Senior martial brother, how can we fight against this person? It's better to retreat now." Elder Meng was also regretting in his heart. The reason why he dared to fight earlier was because he had this bottle of luring dragon in his hand. However, this item was useless now. How could he not know that he could not stop the opponent with his own strength? However, before this, he took the initiative to ask for permission. According to the sect's rules, he could not retreat without being summoned by the sect's elders. Otherwise, he would be severely punished. There was no way out, so he forced himself to be calm and said, "Junior brothers, there is no need to panic. We still have our fellow sect members behind us. With the help of the 4 pools elders, what is there to be afraid of? Quickly follow me down to face the enemy." As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately took out dozens of flying hooks in the sky. He rode on the conveyance light and rushed down. The 2 cultivators behind him were also helpless. After looking at each other, they could only bite the bullet and follow him to kill. Along the way, Zhang Yan saw quite a few Blood Soul sect disciples on both sides. However, their cultivations varied. If he stopped and killed them one by one, it would definitely waste a lot of time. Thus, he did not pay much attention to them. At this moment, when he saw people coming up, he had a thought. In an instant, a vast amount of Fa climbed up and enveloped the surroundings. Elder Meng and the other 2 suddenly felt their bodies stiffen. It was as if they had been restrained by an absolute force. They could not move at all. They immediately knew that they had entered the heaven and earth lock technique. At this moment, on a cliff far away, a middle-aged Taoist with a white face and a long beard sneered. He waved the horsetail whisk in his hand and cast a dispelling spell, immediately removing the power of the restraint. When Zhang Yan saw this, he sneered and casually waved his hand. Before the 3 had time to be happy, he suddenly disappeared from where he was. Their bodies were involuntarily pulled to within 300 feet. Then, they saw countless flashes of lightning in front of them. In a moment of shock, the 3 hurriedly took out their protective magic treasures and desperately used their Fa Li to block it. However, this was undoubtedly a futile action. A flash of sword light flew up and forcibly broke through the protective spirit light. It gently spun around the 3 people's necks and took off their heads. After a breath of time, they were completely submerged by the tyrannical wave of lightning that followed. The middle-aged Taoist frowned and put down the hand that had already been raised. Just now, he originally wanted to help them. However, when the lightning exploded, the aura in his body became stagnant for some reason, causing his movements to slow down by half a beat. The expressions of the Blood Soul sect cultivators who were watching the battle from afar changed. Not to mention Elder Meng's 2 junior brothers, just him alone was a second-rank Yuanian cultivator. His cultivation was deep, but in the hands of the opponent, he was like a puppet, unable to fight back at all. If this person killed his way through the last 3 formations, how would his side resist? Zhang Yan had killed 3 people, but it seemed like he had done something unimportant. With a tap of his feet, he turned into a sword rainbow and rushed into the 9th formation that blocked his way. At this moment, the 11th formation suddenly fluctuated, and an old Taoist flew out from within. He had a panicked expression on his face, and when he saw that Zhang Yan was powerful and difficult to defend against, he gave up all thoughts of fighting him and intended to retreat. Elder Tan glanced at him and said with an indifferent expression, "Lu Xiushan retreated without a fight, please take care of him, Spiritual Master Xian." The middle-aged Taoist did not say a word. He only took a spell. The fleeing cultivator's body suddenly shook. Frozen in midair, he sensed that something was wrong and shouted, "Xian Guangying, what are you doing? I'm not from your Blood Soul sect. I didn't sign a death contract. It's not up to you to deal with me." Elder Tan sighed, "An outsider. As expected, you're unreliable." The middle-aged Taoist ignored him and threw the rui in his hand. Crack. He cracked the person's head, but he showed some mercy and did not destroy the person's primordial spirit, allowing him to escape. Then he bowed to Elder Tan and said, "The remaining 2 formations won't last long, I'll need to go up eventually. If I can't win, I'll leave the sect's disciples to you." Elder Tan sighed and bowed to him solemnly, saying, "Be careful, senior brother Xian." The middle-aged Taoist nodded indifferently. His lifespan was long gone, and as a 3rd-rank cultivator, he had a split soul in his cave abode. Now that he went up, he had the thought of dying with the enemy. Not long after, there was a loud sound in front, and the ninth formation was torn apart by a sword light that shot into the sky. He looked up and said, "Today I ride the wind and leave the dust, tomorrow I get the golden pill and enter the path of immortals again." As he chanted, a streak of light flew up and flew toward the sword light. In the depths of the cave, in the huge blood cloud, there were countless sword chi bursting out, thousands of golden rainbows rushing for a while, killing one of the blood souls trapped within. Qiao Jingdao pointed, and the sword disc above his head spun, absorbing all the golden sword chi and sword light. In these 2 minutes, he had killed 3 blood souls in succession, but what shocked him was that every one of them had power equal to his. If not for the lack of any magical powers, he would have thought that Bailey Qingyin had come personally. But it wasn't like he didn't gain anything. He turned his head to take a look. The Boundary Mountain sword steel was still floating behind him. A small portion of the steel had already turned from its original dark black luster to a greenish-gray color. This was because it had absorbed a great deal of chi during the battle earlier. So long as the entire steel turned plain white, he would be able to drag his opponent in and fight to the death. At this moment, the spiritual light that surrounded him suddenly dimmed. He glanced to the side, and it turned out that unknowingly, the morality talisman beside him was about to burn out. Without the protection of this talisman, the blood rain on top of him would inevitably invade his body. He didn't panic, but calmly took out a copper lamp from his sleeve, and threw it up. Just as the talisman was about to burn out, the lamplight flickered and lit up. This was the 7-star small sword lamp. Yuan Yang Sect's Reverend Fu had made 12 of them, but only one of them was successful. The others were not up to his standards, so he gave them to his disciples, and he got one of them. Spiritual Master Dongtian's handiwork was extraordinary. Although this lamp's light was like a bean, flickering slightly, before the lamp's fuel ran out, it could still block the endless blood rain outside. On the other side, Bailey Qingyin also noticed this change, and his brows slightly tightened. He looked at the blood well in front of him, and it was already a level lower than before. But it was worth it. Among the 5 people now, other than Qiao Jingdao, who was the same as when he first entered, without the slightest injury, the other 4 were more or less infected by the blood rain. A spiritual light flew over, and it was another flying letter. He received it in his hand, opened it, and said, "Senior brother Xian also went into battle. Although he has been in the 3rd stage for a long time, his lifespan is coming to an end, and his spirit has weakened. His fighting ability is probably not as good as junior brother Feng, and he is definitely not Zhang Yan's opponent. But at this time, he wasn't as anxious as just now. Just now, he had to deal with 5 people at the same time, and it would be difficult to take care of all of them at the same time. Next, he only needed to concentrate all of his strength to deal with one person, and if it went smoothly, he could complete the arrangement before Zhang Yan arrived. He stood up from the blood lotus, and his eyes glowed, and said, "Qiao Jingdao, let me personally fight with you." Chapter 833. After Zhang Yan broke the 9th diagram, he rode the sword ray to the sky. There was only one diagram in front of him. As long as he broke it, he would be able to enter the depths of the demon's lair. Just as he was about to make a move, there was a strange movement in front of him. Looking up, he saw a powerful bloody light that was about 30 feet wide rising from the ground and flying towards him. Judging from the aura, he knew that this person's cultivation was not inferior to his. This was the first 3rd-level nascent soul cultivator he had encountered since arriving at this place. Presumably, this person wasn't someone to be trifled with. As a result, he stopped his forward momentum and lightly stamped his foot. A large wave surged out and spread out in front of him. As Daoist Xian flew forward, his flesh and blood started to dry up. First his face and neck, then his body and limbs, revealing the white bones inside. In the end, even his bones and tendons were transformed, and he transformed into a ferocious blood soul that howled and shook the sky. Moreover, his entire body was coiled with strands of dense bloody light. This was a blood demon spirit that he sacrificed all his flesh and blood to feed. At the same time, he destroyed its spirituality and fused it with his body so that he could control it to fight with others. Once this technique was completed, he would no longer be afraid of ordinary treasures. His flying speed was even faster than the sword escape technique. Especially the bloody light on his body. As long as it touched the enemy's body, it could swallow the enemy's blood and turn it into its own mana. It was extremely ferocious. However, such a demon was refined with his blood. In order to control it freely, he had to constantly feed it with his spirit. Therefore, it could only exist for 2 minutes at most. Seeing that blood-red light whizzing towards him, Zhang Yan naturally wouldn't passively face it. He waved his sleeves and a ray of sword ray flew towards him. He could tell that his opponent was going all out. If a third-stage nascent soul cultivator did not care about his own life and was determined to fight to the death, then the power he could display was not to be underestimated. This sword attack was meant to test him. However, when the sword ray landed, the bloody light actually extended its body like a fish and easily dodged it. The sword ray suddenly shook. In an instant, it split into more than 10 rays. As it chased after him, a few rays passed through Daoist Xian's body. However, his body shook a little and he was not hurt at all. According to common sense. At this moment, it was time to take advantage of the situation to advance. Take the initiative. But he didn't come up. He just circled around the glowing wave beside Zhang Yan and retreated into the distance. Although his physical body was gone. However, he had not lost his temperament. There was nothing in the world that he could not break. Even if he had the devil's soul, he did not think that he would be able to gain the upper hand. His objective was to delay Zhang Yan's footsteps. The longer he delayed, the more thorough Bailey Qingyin's arrangements would be. If he could delay until the latter borrowed the spirit cave to form a heavenly abode, then it would be a victory without a doubt. At this moment, as long as he grasped the advantage of his movement technique's speed, he would be able to restrain and deter his opponent by moving about outside. The reason why he purposely revealed his movement speed just now was to make Zhang Yan feel apprehensive. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised to see that his escape technique was so fast and that he was not afraid of the sword light's slash. However, he had many tricks up his sleeves. If this was the only strong point of his opponent, it would not be difficult to deal with him. His thoughts turned slightly and he already had a countermeasure. With a thought, the sword pellets suddenly vibrated and transformed into dozens of sword lights that flew in all directions. He then ignored the opponent and rode the astral wind towards the formation diagram ahead. This was a trap that he had purposely set up. If the opponent dared to break in, he could trap him in the sword formation and deal with him. Although Daoist Xian's cultivation was profound, he did not have much lifespan left. In terms of mana, he was still inferior to Feng Qingping and the others. However, he still had some experience in fights of mana. With a glance, he could tell that there was a hidden killing intent in this move. He shook his body and created a blood doppelganger, leaving it at its original position. He then soared up and transformed into a bloody rainbow as he rushed in. Zhang Yan raised his finger and drew a stroke. A sword circle rose from the ground. The divine light one-breath sword formation had been honed by him for more than 20 years. It moved according to his thoughts and in an instant, it surrounded the opponent. Then, with a push of mana, a bright divine light flew out from the formation and slashed towards the opponent. This sword light was not to be underestimated. It contained the true light of metal element that could cut the spirit. If the opponent was careless, it would most likely take his life. Suddenly, Daoist Xian felt a sense of danger. Before the golden light reached him, he snorted and immediately used the minute dust passing shadow technique. His body suddenly disappeared from where it was. Zhang Yan had fought with the disciples of the Blood Soul sect several times. Among them, Feng Qingping's cultivation was the most profound and his techniques were the most cunning. Thus, he had a deep impression of him. The opponent before him used a technique that was similar to what he saw in the previous battle. He could turn his Dharmakaya into another blood doppelganger in an instant. This time, it was obvious that the sword formation had failed. However, he did not care. The divine light sword formation could be used easily. In addition, he had the protection of the true light of water element on the outside. The inner and outer circles were impenetrable. No matter how many blood doppelgangers the opponent split to break through, he could easily break them. He was already in an invincible position. If the opponent did not mind using up his transcendence energy to repeatedly use his mystical arts, he would be more than happy to play along. After waiting for a while, seeing that he was no longer coming up, he looked at the demon soul. Then, with a wave of his sleeves, he stirred up a strong wind and threw himself into the formation diagram in front of him. Just now, after Taoist Xian had escaped, he stood where he was without moving. No one knew what he was thinking, but he watched him go straight into the formation diagram. He did not go forward to stop him. It was only when Zhang Yan's figure disappeared into the formation that he turned around and said to the cliff in the distance, "Elder Tan, I'm going to use a powerful technique later. Allow me to retreat far away, lest I accidentally injure you." Elder Tan fell silent for a while, then said to the people beside him, "Let's retreat." In reality, after the Blood Soul sect had accepted Zhouling sect's plan, they were not too willing to expend their strength here. They had chosen him to take charge of the situation here because he was cautious and steady. They had even specially instructed him to act according to the situation. However, he had owed Bailey Qingyin a favor in the past, and had to return it. That was why he had put in a lot of effort to stop them. After this battle, more than 10 Yuanying cultivators had died one after another. Seeing that there was even a Yuanying stage 3 great cultivator about to die here, this was probably the sect's bottom line. In the future, if Bailey Qingyin could become a paradise, then everything would be fine. If he failed, then he would not be able to escape responsibility if it was investigated. Moreover, with the strength he had, even if he went up, he would only be sending himself to death. There was no need for him to stay here any longer. After he gave the order, the 1,000-odd disciples beside him felt as if a huge burden had been lifted off their shoulders. All of them took off with flying lights, retreating into the depths of the spirit cave. In less than 10 breaths, all the disciples of the Blood Soul sect had left. Taoist Xian's body swayed, and turned into tens of thousands of blood souls, scattering around the formation. At the same time, he took out more than 200 astral lightning beads from his sleeves, secretly holding them in his hand. He was prepared to throw them down after Zhang Yan came out of the formation. He thought that even if he could not hurt him, he could still catch him off guard. At that time, he could take the opportunity to hurt the enemy. After waiting for half an incense stick of time, the spiritual opportunity in the cave suddenly became noisy. With a loud bang, the last formation that the Blood Soul sect had placed here was also torn apart by a vast mana. Taoist Xian's pair of blood-red eyes stared at the inside of the room. After a while, suddenly, he saw a rainbow of sword light shoot out. He no longer hesitated. With a roar, the tens of thousands of blood souls in all directions roared and rushed in that direction. Zhang Yan saw this scene. His eyes flashed, and he pressed down on the sword light, stopping his forward momentum. Then, the true light in front of him rushed out, followed by the loud sound of waves. With a rumble, all the flying blood souls were sucked in. Taoist Xian took this short opportunity, waved his hand, and threw all the lightning beads down. The power of the explosion of more than 200 lightning beads could be said to be earth-shattering. A normal Yuanying cultivator's soul would be destroyed by the explosion. If a Yuanying cultivator in the third stage was not prepared, he would also be turned into ashes. The water element true light could not wrap around the beads, and the waves exploded one by one, dispersing in the blink of an eye. Taoist Xian was overjoyed, and he summoned more than 10,000 blood souls. He knew that Zhang Yan knew the minor universe movement escape technique, and it was very likely that he would teleport away at the critical moment. This move was meant to block off the escape route. Zhang Yan's expression was calm, and he calmly flicked his sleeve, shattering a talisman. The cloak on his body immediately shone with a clear spiritual light. This robe could only be worn by the top 10 disciples of Qinsang school. There were 3 restrictions on it, and it could withstand 3 attacks of divine arts. Although the lightning beads kept exploding beside him, the clear light only shook slightly, and blocked it. After a while, the light and smoke dissipated. Daoist Xian was shocked to find that there was actually a towering palace that was hundreds of feet in length and width. Clouds and mist gathered, and the spiritual energy was dense. He could not help but exclaim, "Great lofty cloud tower." This battle in the Devil's Cave was not only a competition between cultivators, but also a competition between the resources of the two sections. And the number of talisman weapons refined by Qinsang School's Wanzai Profound Gate far exceeded that of the Blood Soul sect, especially the Great Way's Cloud Tower, which could even block an attack from the Heavenly Abode Master. With this, no one could stop him, so there was no reason for Zhang Yan not to use it. In this way, he did not need to care about Daoist Xian's entanglement, and could quickly reach the depths of the Devil's Cave. Previously, because there were formation diagrams and restrictions on the road, it was difficult to move forward. Now that he had cleared them, there were no more obstacles. The cloud tower shook in the sky, and flew towards the depths of the Devil's Cave. Daoist Xian's expression changed several times, knowing that he could not do anything to this thing. He thought about it for a long time, and suddenly leaped into a bloody light, and rushed down first. After the cloud tower flew for a while, Zhang Yan looked down, and saw a blood cloud about 40 to 50 miles wide blocking the way. With his experience, he judged that there must be a formation set up here, and even if the cloud tower rushed in, it might not be able to break through. This was underground, and the rainbow-splitting awl and the purple sky god thunder net could not connect with the sky-clear chi. Even if he used them, they would not be able to unleash their full power, so he could only choose another way. He thought for a while, and calmly put away the great lofty cloud tower. After that, he silently circulated his mysterious technique. In a short moment, countless yellow smoke rose up and gradually gathered into a large hand above his head. Moreover, as he willed it, rays of yellow light flew out, causing the hand to become even more solid and solid. In the end, it no longer looked like a ball of fog. Instead, the 5 fingers seemed to be distinct, and the lines on the palm were also clearly discernible. When the magic power was used to the extreme, he shouted loudly, and the black-yellow hand that had already turned into the size of a blood cloud slapped down. However, at this moment, the blood fog below surged, and spread upwards, also turning into a big blood-red hand, wrapped with absolute power, and pushed upwards. With a loud rumble, the 2 large hands collided with each other. P.S. Contest of the Great Tao VIP Readers QQ Group Book Friend Recruitment Announcement. Heavens Spill Great Tao, Seoul in 9 provinces. Group was spontaneously formed by a dozen enthusiastic readers of the Great Tao, and readers who loved the Great Tao and were interested in the plot were welcome to join. Chapter 834. In an instant, it was as if a python that had been hibernating for a long time had awoken, twisting its body underground with all its might. At this moment, a muffled rumbling sound could be heard within a radius of 100 miles, and a few deep ravines appeared. The 2 large hands collapsed at the same time, one turning into blood chi, the other into yellow smoke. The heaven and earth became one red and one yellow, slowly spreading apart. After a few breaths, they gathered together again. The next moment, they bombarded the same place again. Boom! This time, it was more violent than the last time. Not only did the big hands disperse, but the fierce wind from the collision of the 2 spread out in all directions. As a result, the river of spiritual vigor that was rushing from all directions was cut off for a moment. However, the people on both sides did not seem to be willing to stop. They condensed the large hands again and went forward to collide with each other again. This time, after fighting, they scattered, and gathered again. After fighting for more than 10 times in a row, there was still no clear victor. The commotion caused the entire cave to tremble. Within the wide cave hall, countless broken stones and dirt fell and collapsed, almost burying the place. Zhang Yan stood high in the air, his large sleeves fluttering as he looked down. Ever since his core reached the 1st grade, the depth of his magic power was unparalleled among his peers. There were few opponents that dared to fight him head-on. This time, the opponent took the initiative to compete in magic power, which was exactly what he wanted. In the Blood Soul sect, other than Bailey Qingyin, who was known as the strongest in magic power, there was no one else who could do this. He could sense that the spirit qi under the blood cloud was abundant and unfathomable, and could reach the spirit cave from here. But before he arrived, there were no signs of fighting. In other words, Qiao Jingdao and the other four who had come here first had either been taken care of by the cultivators of the Blood Soul sect, or they had stopped here and were trapped in this place that seemed to be a formation but was not a formation. In the depths of the blood cloud, Bailey Qingyin stood on the blood lotus with his hands behind his back. His body was straight, but his expression was slightly serious. This time, no matter where he was, it was still the method of fighting. It could be said that he had chosen it all. Adding on the fact that the fortune of the Devil's sect was flourishing, it could be said that the time, place, and people were not lacking. Ever since he opened his meridians, he had practiced the blood cloud hand. By now, he had already reached the state of being able to condense it. He was in a state where he could use it freely. In the past, when he encountered an enemy, he only had to divide his blood souls to surround them and seal off their path before striking out with his palm. Victory would be decided in one fell swoop. This wasn't to say that his fighting abilities were crude, but rather that he was making full use of his strong magical power. He walked the path of using magical power to suppress his opponent. However, just now, the blood well in front of him had dropped by a large amount. This was only a few dozen exchanges, but the amount of mana consumed was more than what he had just now against Qiao Jingdao and the other four. It could be imagined that if he did not have this treasure and other prepared methods, he would not be able to do so. If this were to happen again, it would be difficult for him to last a day. Just as he was thinking about whether he should use a method to deal with it in advance, he saw a ray of light charging out from a crack in the stone beside him, and it went straight for Zhang Yan. The speed of the light was truly unimaginable. His eyes flashed. Elder Xen? Just now when Elder Tan led the disciples to retreat, he also knew about it. He originally thought that Zhang Yan would come here. Daoist Xian should have died in battle, but he didn't expect him to be hiding in the dark, waiting for a chance. His spirits rose. If there was a third-stage realm cultivator assisting him from the side, helping him to restrain the opponent, then the chances of him hanging on would be much higher. He immediately stretched out his hand and pointed. A blood arrow shot upwards, reaching a distance of 1,000 feet. It gradually faded, and when it was a mile away, it had already turned into a formless substance. Then he shook his sleeves, continuously circulating his magical power. In the void above, there were first 2 balls of blood clouds rolling, and after a short while, a pair of blood-colored hands condensed, slowly stretching out its 5 fingers. Just now Daoist Xian couldn't do anything to the lofty cloud tower, but he had arrived here a step earlier, hiding at one side. He originally wanted to wait for Zhang Yan and Bailey Qingyin to exchange blows, and then go forward to launch a sneak attack. But when the 2 sides collided, he discovered that under the surging magical power, he was totally unable to get close. Now that he had found a gap, how would he let it go? As long as he was touched by the blood light around him, no matter how high the opponent's magical power was, he would be able to seize his flesh and blood in an instant. In order to rush into the depths of the Devil's Cave in time, Zhang Yan didn't bother about Daoist Xian. He knew that this person would definitely not give up, so even when he was fighting with Bailey Qingyin, he was always on guard against his surroundings. Now that he had just made a move, he immediately sensed it. But just as he was about to defend, he heard a clear cry from the Qinghong sword pill. His heart moved, and he immediately retracted his hand. With a turn of his feet, his figure suddenly disappeared from where he was. Almost at the same time he moved, a blood arrow passed through where he was originally at, and with a whoosh, it went straight into the depths of the cave. 3,000 feet away, Zhang Yan's figure appeared again, and at the same time, the true light of water rose up behind him. With a whoosh, it surged out, like a jade dragon spiraling up, and circling around his side. Just at this moment, there was movement below again. The blood cloud surged, and two blood-colored hands stretched out, grabbing towards him from the left and right. Daoist Xian saw that the opportunity had come, and in order to prevent him from teleporting again, he stretched out his hand and made a grabbing motion, casting a heaven and earth lock technique. Zhang Yan smiled slightly, and casually removed the forbidden technique. With another clear shout, a verdant green light was pulled up from under his feet, and in a split second, rushed up into the sky, and blocked the two big hands that were about to close together. Then, like spreading out branches and leaves, it constantly split into strands of tiny green light, expanding outwards, and actually slowly pushed them away. Daoist Xian was about to charge again, but suddenly his breath stagnated, and his heart shivered. He understood that his continuous operation of mana had caused the demon's soul to repeatedly gnaw at his spirit, and he was afraid that he could not attack head-on like just now. This moment of delay seemed to be fine, but in reality, he had lost the best opportunity to attack. Helpless, he could only turn away. Bailey Qingyin noticed that the light that Daoist Xian had transformed into had dimmed, and knew that he could not hold on for much longer, and would completely perish in less than 10 minutes. In the blood cloud, he was separated from Zhang Yan by several tens of miles, and only had a few methods that could pose a threat to the latter. But if the opponent's mysterious yellow hand came slapping over, he had no choice but to use the blood cloud hand to take it head-on. In this kind of situation, there was a cultivator of the same generation at the side to restrain, and the situation was much better, so now he could not do without this person. As the eldest disciple of this generation of the Blood Soul sect, he naturally knew the details of the Blood Fiend Demon Soul. After a cultivator used this technique, all their flesh and blood would be completely dissolved, and according to common sense, they would only be able to live for half an hour. But as long as they absorbed fresh flesh and spirit to nourish themselves, they could slightly extend the time they lived in the world. The higher the cultivation of the cultivator they devoured, the stronger the effect. And in his blood cloud, there were 5 great cultivators trapped, and all of them had been planted with the divine ability of borrowing object to substitute form, so he could take 1 or 2 of them for the demon's soul to devour. But this also had a drawback, and that was that their consciousness would slowly lose, and before long, they would finally become true demonic creatures that only knew how to devour flesh and blood, and did not distinguish between friend and foe. But he did not care about this. Even if it really reached that step, the demon's soul would not be able to enter his blood jade smokescreen, and would only endlessly cause trouble for Zhang Yan. After Zhang Yan stabilized the situation, he lightly raised his sleeves, and a scarlet flame soared from the 2 sides of his shoulders. The fire was born from the wood, and suddenly flourished. Like 2 wings of fire flapping, it immediately burned the 2 blood hands into flying ash. At the same time, yellow smoke slowly spread, and a large yellow hand several dozen li in size appeared from behind his head. He judged that there should be a formation below, and apart from magic treasures, unless one charged in, they would have to use mana from the outside to break through. Since it had reached this step, there was no need to consider anything else, and only needed to circulate the mana around his body and forcefully suppress the opponent. So with a turn of his mana, the large yellow hand's 5 fingers spread wide, and with a thunderous rumble, pressed down again. A bright light appeared in Bailey Qingyin's eyes as he stared closely at the descending hand. In the instant it struck the blood cloud, he formed a strange spell with his hand, and executed the borrowing object to substitute form technique. He grasped the timing perfectly, and the charging mana suddenly disappeared. This powerful and ferocious attack actually dissipated into nothingness. At this moment, on the side of the blood cloud, the Sure couple were fighting with dozens of blood souls. To them, it should have been easy, but suddenly, the Dharma robes on their bodies exploded with bright light, and then the golden restrictions on their sleeves were completely shattered. Not only that, even the jade pendants and golden beads the 2 were carrying collapsed together. As if their bodies had been smashed by a hammer, they both spat out a mouthful of blood. How powerful was this attack from Zhang Yan? But because of Bailey Qingyin's divine ability, the power was completely transferred to the couple. Even the protective robes couldn't hide it, and they were immediately heavily injured. At this moment, the two were fighting with the blood souls, and with this opening, the dozens of blood souls surrounding them wouldn't let it go, and immediately rushed forward with a howl. Sure, Hanshan forced himself to pull himself together, but because he couldn't defend in time, he could only use his mana and spat out another mouthful of blood essence. When the blood foam came out, it suddenly condensed into a small sword made of essence chi, which circled around his body and chopped all the attacking blood souls. But after executing this technique, there was no longer any color on his face. His body swayed, as if he could no longer withstand the astral wind, and could fall at any time. At this moment, Xiaoyu had slightly recovered, and seeing him like this, her beautiful face immediately paled. Not caring about wiping the blood from the corner of her mouth, she supported him and said anxiously, "Husband, how are you?" Sure, Hanshan said with a trembling voice, "Quickly use the sex-treasured talisman." Xiaoyu also knew it was a matter of life and death, so she didn't dare to hesitate. She was about to take out the treasured talisman from the fragrance pouch, but before she could do so, a cyan jade bead soundlessly flew out from the darkness and smashed right on her back. Now that the two of them were seriously injured, their senses weren't as good as before. The bead of disaster was also extremely good at concealing itself, so they didn't notice it. With this smash, not only did it strike away the last bit of spiritual light on her robe, it also pierced through her body and flew out from her chest, hitting Sure Hanshan's neck. With a kacha sound, his head was actually sent flying, and the husband and wife died almost at the same time. Bailey Qingyin saw it clearly, and secretly used her mana to pull the two out of the formation along with their primordial spirits. Then, she threw them outside and transmitted her voice, "Elder Xian, there are two corpses of third-layer Yuaniing cultivators here, catch them properly." Daoist Xian smelled blood from afar, and suddenly felt his body and mind palpitate. He immediately followed the direction of the corpses and rushed over. When he saw the corpses, he pounced, and with a roll of bloody light, the two's muscles, bones, blood, and flesh were all absorbed into his devil body. Chapter 835. After Daoist Xian swallowed the two, he immediately felt a wonderful taste spread all over his body. His mana suddenly increased, and he couldn't help but roar at the sky. His eyes also revealed a bloodthirsty madness that didn't belong to a cultivator. His body suddenly shook, transforming into thousands of blood souls, which instantly occupied a large area of the sky. Zhang Yan saw this scene, and he slightly narrowed his eyes. The other was originally weak, but after swallowing someone's corpse, his blood chi recovered completely. Although it wasn't a big threat to him, but if left alone, it would still be troublesome. Especially when he joined forces with Bailey Qingyin, it would be even more difficult to deal with, and he needed to find a way to eliminate him first. But after this person transformed into a demonic body, his flying speed was still above him, and he couldn't take the initiative to find him. Only by luring him to attack would it be easy to end things. He quickly calculated in his mind, and immediately came up with a countermeasure. Mana surged all over his body, countless spiritual chi gathered from all directions, and in an instant, the black and yellow hand condensed, and with another push, it slammed down on the blood cloud. This attack didn't accumulate much power, and was extremely fast, very different from just now. Bailey Qingyin saw it from below, and also didn't show any weakness. With a low shout, two blood cloud palms flipped in the air to meet it. Daoist Xian saw a gap to take advantage of, and couldn't help but leap forward, rushing up again. Zhang Yan was waiting for this moment, and sneered in his heart. Suddenly, an object flew out from his sleeve, and a white light appeared above his head. It looked like a polished jade piece, as thin as a paper wing, translucent and glossy. In this cave, a dazzling brilliance suddenly flashed, like the sun in the sky, and instantly swept across the whole area, illuminating everything here down to the finest detail. Zhang Yan glanced over, and could clearly see at this moment. The thousands of blood souls were all a mass of blood chi, and only one of them had a clear face. They didn't look like the same kind. When he was illuminated by that brilliance, Daoist Xian had an inexplicable feeling, as if all his outer shell was stripped off, and exposed to the light of day. This was the hazy light mirror bestowed by Shen Bai Shuang. Even if the demonic cultivators had thousands of incarnations, under this treasure, they couldn't hide. Zhang Yan found the location of Daoist Xian's real body and immediately took out a talisman with 2 fingers. With a light tremble, Swan Ni spread out in the sky, turning into a black talisman that was 150 zhang tall. Boundless magic power surged out from it. In an instant, all the spiritual vigor within a radius of a few miles was frozen. Daoist Xian was caught off guard and his body stiffened. He was instantly frozen in midair. When he suddenly encountered such a situation, his first thought was that he had been trapped in a sealed world, so he hurriedly tried to undo the seal. However, when he tried, he found that it was completely useless, and he was shocked. He wanted to use the minute dust passing technique to turn his Dharmakaya elsewhere. However, the moment he thought of this, he was shocked. The magic power in his body was like a pool of stagnant water, unable to move at all. When cultivators fought, any mistake or hesitation would be fatal, not to mention this moment of delay. Zhang Yan seized the opportunity. How would he miss it? He immediately circulated his magic power and a golden light flew out from his back. It was like a thin line, flashing in the field for a moment before disappearing. Daoist Xian stood still in a daze. After a short while, a faint shadow of a devil swept past him. With a soundless roar, it dissipated. His body trembled violently. With a cracking sound, he exploded into countless jet-black blood clots that fell like raindrops. At the same time, the blood doppelgangers that filled the sky were like reflections in the water, being blown by the breeze, crumbling one after another. Zhang Yan flicked his sleeves, and the torrential water light behind him surged like a tide, surging upwards, wrapping all the blood chunks into it. When Bailey Qingyin saw this, he couldn't help but frown. He had just sent the sure couple to Daoist Xian for him to consume, but who knew that in less than 100 breaths' time, he would lose his life. What he had done previously was just a waste of effort. He instantly felt that he had lost a round in the battle with Zhang Yan. Without a third-stage realm cultivator restraining him from the side, it was unavoidably a little difficult to deal with him. If he wanted to stabilize the situation, he could only use the backup plan that he had prepared earlier. He took out a glazed jade pot from his sleeves, opened the lid, and shook it towards the sky, spitting out a wisp of red smoke. When it reached the horizon, he lightly blew at the mouth of the bottle, and with a shake of the smoke, tens of thousands of blood spirits flew out. He raised his hand and with a flick, a gust of wild wind surged over, sending all of them out of the blood cloud. These blood spirits were refined from the devils that he had captured underground, and were not formed from his own blood essence and magic power. They didn't have a soul within them, so they weren't bound by him. But because of this, they maintained their demonic nature, brutal and tyrannical, not fearing death. The moment they entered the sky, seeing a living person like Zhang Yan here, they immediately pounced forward to bite him without a care. Bailey Qingyin was clear in his heart that these blood spirits alone couldn't do anything to Zhang Yan. But taking them out at this moment wasn't to subdue the enemy, but to delay Zhang Yan for a moment, so that he could free up his hands to execute the incantation. He recited a secret incantation, and pressed his fingers together to point at his chest. Suddenly, a clanging sound came from the field, like the sound of a sharp blade being unsheathed. An illusory blood saber appeared in the air, and chopped at his neck. Where the saber's shadow passed, a person that looked exactly like him appeared on the right side. This divine ability was called Full Moon Half Sun, and with this method, he could chop down a magic power doppelganger. This wasn't something that those ordinary blood spirits could compare to, as it took up half of his magic power and a small half of his soul. All the divine arts that he knew, this doppelganger was proficient in them, and could be said to be no different from the real body. Because his magic power was number one among his peers in the devil sect, once this divine ability was used, it was equivalent to 2 against 1. Using this method to deal with an ordinary third-stage cultivator, there was almost no possibility of failure, but using it to deal with Zhang Yan, he still felt that it wasn't enough. With a thought, that doppelganger suddenly bent down, and moved close to the mouth of the blood well, and fiercely sucked in a mouthful. The blood water inside immediately decreased by a large amount. He was unmoved, and raised his hand to point. This magic treasure flew up, and when it reached the sky, it tilted downwards, and the blood water flowed out. He raised his neck and moved closer, and immediately drank a lot of it. Only when his body was full of essence and chi did he stop. The water in this well could originally replenish magic power by sensing chi, but now it was directly drunk. No matter if it was the doppelganger or the original body, their magic power was completely restored in a moment. But now there was only a thickness of 2 fingers left, and it couldn't be used for many times, so he couldn't squander it like before. But he didn't panic. The blood spirit sect had its own methods to absorb the essence and blood of the Xian sect cultivators for his own use. There were still 3 people trapped in the blood jade smoke snare formation, and they were all 3rd stage cultivators. To him, it was like a great tonic, and when the time came, he only needed to borrow the divine arts to get rid of them, and then he could use it to nourish himself, so that he could hold on for a period of time. Although the doppelganger was formed, he wasn't in a hurry to send it forward. Fighting was also about strategy, and it was especially important to grasp the timing of the attack. This kind of killing move was left to be used at the critical moment, and it was far more useful than rushing into battle. At this time, in the sky, Zhang Yan's movements were calm, and he only used the water element light to rush back and forth, sweeping away the 10,000 blood spirits. Then, with his hands behind his back, he looked down, and his eyes flickered slightly. In the previous few attacks, the opponent didn't use strength to fight strength, thinking of ways to not let his attacks fall into the blood cloud, which meant that this method was correct, and it was enough to pose a threat. Since that was the case, he wasn't prepared to change his method. The mana in his body flowed, and the shadow of a big hand clearly appeared, and then slowly solidified. But this time, it was twice as big as before. This kind of fair and square collision depended on whose mana was higher. The strong was strong, the weak was weak, and there was no room for falsehood. Even if the opponent had a method to resolve it, it would also consume mana, and even if it could resolve the danger for a moment, it couldn't change the overall situation. With a loud shout, he roused his spiritual vigor and pressed it down brazenly. Bailey Qingyin saw that this time, the power was unprecedented, and seemed to be using his real skill. His heart shivered, but he didn't want to take it head-on. After a short while, the mysterious yellow hand came crashing down, and the moment it came into contact with the blood cloud, he exhaled and channeled his magic power. Once again, he used the object substitution technique to transfer all the power out. This time, the person he chose. It was Nanhua Sect's Yuan Zirong. At this moment, there were 9 strange beast spirit essences surrounding him, and he could deal with the blood spirits with ease. Although his expression looked relaxed, in his heart, he already had the intention to retreat. He came here to suppress the demonic cave, but he was trapped here and couldn't get out. Even if he didn't get hurt, it wouldn't help the overall situation. As time passed, the chance of success would only get smaller and smaller. Just as he was thinking, the blue toad and white dog at the sides suddenly hissed at the same time, and their voices were extremely mournful. Suddenly, he felt an unbelievably huge mana descend from the sky, as if it wanted to squash him, and his expression instantly changed. At this moment of life and death, he let out a wild shout and mobilized all of his magic power without a care for anything else. In an instant, a shadow of a turtle suddenly appeared on his body. The shell on its back pushed up and actually withstood the great force. Not long after, the great force finally dispersed, but his expression was dispirited, and his eyes were lifeless. It was obvious that he had exhausted too much of his yuan qi, and because he had placed all his attention on dealing with this attack, a lot of blood rain had inadvertently landed on his body. Originally, he thought that it was just a dirty thing, and he didn't care much about it, but just now, he suffered a loss, and he instantly became vigilant. After thinking about it, he realized that if this blood rain was really causing trouble, no matter how he dealt with it, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't fail, and the best plan was to retreat as soon as possible. He sighed in his heart, and said, "Fellow Taoists, I have tried my best, but the situation is not good, I can only leave first." Once he made up his mind, he was also decisive. He immediately pursed his lips and blew, and 1,000 feet long dragon suddenly flew out from between his brows, and wrapped around his body. It actually ignored all the obstacles, and with a bang, it rushed out of the blood cloud, and then brutally smashed its way out of the cave. In the blink of an eye, it flew into the sky, and in the blink of an eye, only the sound of the dragon's roar was left. Not long after he left, in the ravine that was smashed open, a huge spiritual vigor of unknown origin poured in, and went straight into the cave. At the same time, as if adding fuel to the fire, all the spiritual vigor here flowed rapidly, and with a rumble, it was more than twice as fast. Bailey Qingyin was startled at first, then suddenly looked toward the sky, and a hint of ecstasy appeared in his eyes. Is it really me? Chapter 836. According to Bailey Qingyin's original calculations, it would take at least 2 days for the spirit cave to condense. Due to the lack of support from the sect, it would not be easy to survive this period of time under the pressure of the Taoist sect. Therefore, from the beginning, he did his best to lay out the blood jade smoke net. However, he did not expect that just now, when Yuan Zirong left, he actually broke a barrier, causing the spiritual opportunity that poured into this place to flourish. Naturally, the flow of the earth's qi was not something that could be controlled by humans. Even those as strong as the Taoist abode heavenly abode could only use treasured weapons to create some kind of illusion. Yuan Zirong undoubtedly played a role in adding fuel to the fire. Even without him, this matter would have happened sooner or later. Based on the current situation, the spirit cave would finally condense in at most 4 to 6 hours. That was to say, the opportunity for him to become a heavenly abode was right in front of him. As these thoughts turned, his spirit gradually became excited, and the light in his eyes grew brighter and brighter. Although he was facing the threat of Zhang Yan, he had a doppelganger whose mana was no less than his. He only needed to rely on the blood jade smoke net to replace defense with offense and take the initiative to attack. It was not difficult to contend for a few hours. Because of his excitement, the mana in his body surged, causing the blood cloud that covered a radius of 10 miles to slowly move. Zhang Yan was in the field, and he could see the changes that were close at hand. Due to the changes in the surrounding spiritual opportunity, this first plan was no longer feasible. If he continued to fight like this, he could only help his opponent. At this moment, his eyes became incomparably deep. In extreme times, extreme methods were needed. Ignoring the blood souls that flew out from the blood cloud, he pulled himself up. He flew straight up into the sky, reaching the end of the top. He pointed with his finger, and countless thin jade lights flew out from behind him. Like countless branches and vines, they followed along all the cracks, caves, gullies, and tunnels, and spread towards the surface. For a moment, everything within 100 miles of the underground was enveloped in a flourishing green. Bailey Qingyin frowned. Although he could not see what Zhang Yan was doing, he knew that it was definitely not beneficial to him. He could not let it go, so he sent all the blood souls up to attack. Zhang Yan didn't pay any attention to it. The clear swan sword pill beside him gave off a long and clear cry and transformed into 108 sword lights with a clang. The sword lights were like rain. As the threads hung down, they actually instantly set up a defensive sword formation. Numerous blood souls flew over like moths flying into a flame, and before they could even get close, they were torn apart by countless sharp and fine sword lights. Bailey Qingyin shook her head. At their level of cultivation, which one of them didn't have at least 2 or 3 powerful tricks up their sleeves? Just now, when Zhang Yan was in a confrontation with him, when one side insisted on defending, the other side couldn't do anything to the other side in the short term. If they were in another world. It wasn't that he didn't have any ideas, but he had to suppress the remaining 2 people in the blood cloud. If he couldn't leave, then the methods he could use were extremely limited. He could only watch helplessly as his opponent attacked. As Zhang Yan circulated his transcendence energy with all his might, the wood elemental true light advanced at an extremely fast speed. In less than an hour, it had already reached the surface along the various ravines in the underground. Like a shoot breaking through the soil, countless bluish-green brilliance emerged from the cracks. His eyes flashed like lightning. Since this place was deep underground and didn't connect with the clear sky chi, he couldn't use the divine thunder treasure weapon. Then he would use mana to open a path. Seeing that the time had come, his tongue was like spring thunder, and he suddenly shouted loudly. Rumble! The earth quaked and the mountains shook. With this shout, all the green light suddenly expanded tens of thousands of times. The entire underground cave had been washed by spiritual opportunity, and some places were as hard as metal and stone, but still couldn't withstand such devastation, and collapsed one after another. The vast water light rolled up, and countless pieces of mud, stone, and rocks were all submerged within. Zhang Yan looked up, and the great sun was in the sky. Under the bright light, it instantly connected heaven and earth. With a flip of his palm, the 10,000 miles rainbow splitting all was in his hand, and then he threw it into the sky. In a split second, the wind blew violently, and the wind and clouds gathered from all directions. There was a faint rumble of thunder. Bailey Qingyin's expression changed several times. He hadn't thought beforehand that the other actually had a method to connect the underground cave. Such a few powerful methods were no longer limited. This time, there was no time to think too much, and could only deal with the following attack with all his strength. He clapped his palms together, and with a paw, a silver mirror floated up behind him. Behind the mirror, there were countless tiny blood silkworms entwined. Once this mirror appeared, it slowly floated upwards, and reached the sky above the blood cloud. In an instant, it grew larger, and the mirror's surface was horizontal, like a bright full moon, just happened to cover the blood cloud. Just now that he had done all this, the thunder was already crashing down. Bombarded by countless bolts of lightning, the treasure mirror shook violently, and then shook unceasingly. Bailey Qingyin kept pouring mana into it to maintain this treasure. The blood water in the blood well was already dropping at a visible rate, and in a short while, it was already at the bottom. He snorted, obviously unable to hold on any longer. The treasure mirror was also just about to shatter. When the clone at the side saw this, he suddenly took a step forward. 2 clouds of smoke emerged from the top of his head, and then condensed into 2 large blood cloud hands, slapping towards the sky. This rainbow splitting all was originally used to break formations. Although it could still injure a divine ability like the large blood cloud hands, it couldn't be broken in an instant. When Zhang Yan saw this, he shook his sleeve, and countless yellow smoke flew over, condensing into a sturdy large hand that pressed down steadily. The avatar's eyes flickered, and just as it was about to collide with the crimson hand, it made a hand seal and took the initiative to dissipate the crimson hand. It only sent its blood chi upward, and at the same time, it used an object substitution technique to divert its power elsewhere. At this moment, Shi Muhua of Taihao School was still looking for a way out in the blood cloud. Just a few breaths ago, he sensed that the pressure around him had lightened a lot, faintly seeming to sense where the right path was. Just as he was wondering if the enemy had deliberately set up a trap, a gourd-shaped jade talisman on his body suddenly made a light sound, and broke into countless pieces, falling onto the cloud. Suddenly seeing this scene, his whole body quivered, as if he had seen something terrifying. He took out a jade-green willow branch, and spat out a mouthful of vital essence. Using his mana as the root, it continuously grew from the palm of his hand. In the blink of an eye, it had reached a height of 30 feet. Tens of thousands of willow branches hung down like silk, brushing left and right. But before it had risen to the highest point, a terrifying mana descended upon him. The whole willow tree seemed to be pressed down by a mountain range, and it bent down, looking like it could break at any time. Shi Muhua felt the mana in his body was already being consumed at a rapid speed. He saw the willow branches break off and float down. Although he didn't know what method this was, he immediately felt that something was wrong. Although he didn't know what method this was, if it came a few more times, how would he be able to block it? After his expression changed a few times, he reached out and clapped. A wooden token talisman at his waist released a clear light, shooting straight to the horizon. Looking at it, it looked like a tall and straight pine tree that could support the heavens and the earth. He lowered his body and burrowed inside. That green light suddenly swept up, and he disappeared. Bailey Qingyin sensed that Shi Muhua had been forced away, and his heart slightly relaxed. This time, he definitely wasn't willing to give up this opportunity to form a heavenly abode. But to stop the lightning cone attack, he could only take the initiative to face the enemy. It was just that once he left the formation, the two people below would escape. At that time, he would have to face 3 profound gate great cultivators, and it would definitely be even more dangerous. But if there was one less, he could let his clone take his place in presiding over the formation. Gathering the full power of the formation, trapping the last person wouldn't be a problem. He gave a low shout, and soared up. He transformed into a scarlet red light that soared into the sky, and for the first time, he killed his way out of the formation. Zhang Yan smiled. The other party couldn't resist killing his way out, and the situation of host and guest would be reversed. Under the illumination of the hazy light mirror above, he immediately identified this as the other party's true body. Waiting for the other party to come closer, he took out a sealing talisman. He threw it outwards. When this talisman came out, it immediately became 300 zhang in size, and endless clear light scattered in the surroundings. Bailey Qingyin had just closed the distance between the two when his body was locked in place. Even the mana in his body couldn't be channeled. But although he was shocked, he didn't panic. Just now, he had seen the power of this talisman. In a situation where he wasn't sure if Zhang Yan still had such a treasure, if he didn't have the confidence to receive it, how would he dare to go forward? When Zhang Yan saw that Bailey Qingyin had been locked in place, he raised his hand without hesitation. A thin golden light flew out from behind him, and chopped straight at the ladder. But just as it arrived in front of this person, there was suddenly a ball of amber-like splendor that burst forth. Looking carefully, one could see dazzling colors circulating within, and it actually easily blocked this attack. Zhang Yan didn't show the slightest surprise on his face. Instead, he smiled faintly, and thought to himself, blood-glazed glass. It really is this item. People like Bailey Qingyin had extremely high positions in the sect, and would definitely have protective treasures hidden on them, making them very difficult to kill. But if one were to speak of the protective treasures of the Blood Soul sect, it would definitely be the Scarlet Fire blood-glazed glass. This item was formed in the blood pool, and only one piece would appear every 1,000 years. It was extremely rare, and could even block the slash of a killing true artifact. But there was one flaw. After it was released, it would dissipate in a few breaths of time. Zhang Yan had never heard of this item before, and had only learned of it after flipping through Inata Temple's demon-subduing treasured record. If not for this, he would definitely have used the Dark North Heavenly Sword in an attempt to defeat the enemy in one blow. But if he had really done that, not only would he have wasted a Dark North Sword clone, he would also have had a killing move broken by the opponent. At this time, the sealing talisman in the sky had dissipated. Although his attack had failed, he still held the initiative, and so he attacked calmly. Immediately, the flying sword flew out to attack. Not only that, the sword light was mixed with 1 or 2 rays of metal element true light from time to time. After Bailey Qingyin escaped from the sealing talisman, he had lost the initiative. Adding on the fact that he had nowhere to hide under the chaotic sky mirror, even splitting the blood soul was useless. He could only dodge, and for a moment, was actually forced to the point where he couldn't find time to counterattack. Zhang Yan had already thought of a follow-up move when he had used the sealing talisman. Because he had one more breath of time than the opponent, his attacks were continuous, not giving him the slightest chance to breathe. At this moment, he had already firmly grasped the rhythm of the battle in his hands. As long as the opponent revealed a flaw, he could kill him in one blow. Bailey Qingyin obviously knew the crux of this. If the battle continued like this, he would definitely lose. He had to quickly find a countermeasure. After 1,000 thoughts in his mind, he suddenly thought of an idea. With a thought, the blood soul hiding in the blood cloud suddenly stood up, and then sprayed a mouthful of spiritual qi into the cloud. At the same time, on the other side of the blood cloud, the JUS sword steel behind Xiao Zhengdao suddenly trembled, its color suddenly turning grayish-white. Then, it suddenly released 2 rays of spiritual light, simultaneously spraying onto Bailey Qingyin and the Blood Soul clone. Success! Bailey Qingyin's eyes lit up, and his body actually disappeared into thin air. When he reappeared, he found himself in a world full of floating golden swords. He had actually cleverly borrowed Xiao Zhengdao's Jus sword steel, which could absorb the opponent's qi, and then drag him into the battle, and promptly escaped from Zhang Yan's sword. Although this wasn't a technique of borrowing objects to substitute for one's form, it was still a technique of borrowing force. It was even more brilliant, and in only a moment, it had reversed the situation. But here, he had to face another profound sect disciple, and the other's Fa Li was even 30% more than before. But Bailey Qingyin wasn't afraid. Because his own spirit was in the Blood Soul clone, it was also dragged into this place. At this moment, it was 2 against 1, and his chances of victory were above the other. As long as he eliminated this person, and swallowed the Dharmakaya Fang Yuanling, he wouldn't have to worry about anything. Even if the blood cloud was broken, it wouldn't matter. After a while, he could still fight with Zhang Yan. Chapter 837. Yuan Yang, Tai Hao, and Nan Hua, 3 sects, had a total of 5 disciples. The Shi couple died in battle. Yuan Zirong and Shi Mu Hua, 2 of them, borrowed the magical weapons given by their masters to protect their lives and fled back to the mountain gate, never to return. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Zhengdao was the only one left in the blood cloud. When Yuan Zirong and Shi Muhua left, they had caused a huge commotion and he had sensed it. Others could leave, but as the head disciple of Yuan Yang's sect and the person in charge, he couldn't leave so easily. Moreover, although Yuan Zirong and Shi Muhua had left, they had also disturbed the spiritual opportunity when they broke through the blood cloud, causing a few cracks to appear. Therefore, it wasn't like he didn't gain anything. With the compass given by the sect, he had already found some clues to break the formation. If he was given another 15 minutes, he might be able to find the way out and go straight to the devil's cave below. However, at this moment, the Jus sword steel behind him suddenly vibrated. Then, 2 beams of spiritual light flew into the sky. Xiao Zhengdao's eyes glowed. It was obvious that this treasure had absorbed enough qi and was trying to pull people in. Without any hesitation, he turned around and walked into the sword steel. As soon as he entered, a wave of spiritual energy seeped into his chest. Suddenly, his body felt light and his mind became clear. His spiritual energy and magical power rose, and he seemed to have an inexhaustible amount of magical power. After a few breaths, the sword steel shook and 2 beams of spiritual light entered. Then, 2 silhouettes appeared 1,000 feet away. He knew that the master had arrived. His eyes glowed and he pointed with his finger. The sword plate above his head suddenly exploded with thousands of sword lights. They were like fire and gold, like the morning sun, layer upon layer. They went straight for the newcomers. After using this method, he didn't stop moving. His hands kept making hand signs, and the magical power in his body boiled. Spiritual energy gushed out from the acupoints of his Dharmakaya and turned into flaming sword lights. They were shaped like clouds and flew out with rainbow-like flames. This was the Red Dragon Cloud Sword. It was the Taibai Golden Dawn Qi that he had cultivated for hundreds of years. Then, he mixed it into the sky and transformed it into the Yang Fusion Elite. It was fearless of filth and specialized in destroying evil spirits. Few cultivators from the Devil's Doctrine could resist it. But that wasn't all. He flicked his sleeve again. He threw something out. It looked like a golden seal. Rumbling in the sky, it struck downwards. The space inside the realm peak sword steel was narrow and small. There was no turning back, and it was impossible for him to dodge, which was perfect for Yuan Yang sect cultivators like him. Therefore, he attacked without any hesitation. Moreover, at this moment, his spiritual power had increased by 30%. Whether it was the power of his Dao techniques or divine abilities, they were far above his usual level. He had the upper hand. Bailey Qingyin's reaction was extremely fast. Seeing the sword light coming over, he immediately raised a bloody cloud hand and slapped over, colliding with it. But that waterfall-like sword light was unending, and it only blocked for a moment before collapsing. However, he did not panic. Xiao Jingdao's attacks were like a storm. If he were to take it on alone, even if he withstood it, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Based on the opponent's cultivation and mana, the outcome would be obvious. However, he had his mana doppelganger by his side, which made things very different. With a thought, the avatar suddenly waved its hand, and another crimson cloud hand flew out, slapping forward, and blocking this round of attacks. Bailey Qingyin won a moment of respite. He pulled himself together, and also used his arts. The two of them exerted their power together, and the crimson cloud hand kept condensing, slapping down one after another. There was almost no pause, and the situation was immediately stabilized. His doppelganger was as deep as his mana. Now that it was 2 against 1, he didn't need to use any treasures. Just this divine ability alone was enough to suppress the opponent. Xiao Jingdao wanted to kill the opponent in one go, but he didn't expect the opponent to be able to hold on. And in this battle of techniques, he was inadvertently dragged into a battle of mana. This wasn't what he wanted. Yuan Yang sect's divine abilities and Dao techniques were superior in their attacks, but they were slightly lacking in stamina. The longer it dragged on, the more variables there would be. He lowered his head, and said in his heart, "Daoist Master De Yuan, please lend me a hand." As soon as this thought appeared in his mind, a handsome cultivator with a chiseled face walked out from the void and nodded at him. Then, with a flash of his body, he transformed into a magic sword that was more than 3 feet long and glowed with azure light. It flickered with a cold light. This sword was called Daoist Sword of Justice, and was a killing true weapon of Yuan Yang sect. This was his true killing move. Previously, the sect master of Yuan Yang sect had begged for it, and only then did he reluctantly agree to help him once. As soon as this sword entered the sky, it transformed into a stream of light and slashed away, covering a distance of several dozen feet in a flash. However, just as it reached the top of Bailey Qingyin's head, a sinister-looking black-robed old Taoist appeared behind him, transforming into a 2-pointy, wide and round abdomen, and shaped like a shuttle. Xiao Jingdao was shocked, and blurted out, "Soul-seeking blood blade." When the Taoist sword saw this blade, it seemed to hesitate, and didn't slash down, but circled outside. The soul-seeking blood blade also only deterred in place, and didn't chase after it. These two true weapons seemed to be fearful of each other. After confronting each other for a while, as if they had reached some kind of tacit understanding, they both retreated. No matter how the two of them tried to order them around, they didn't pay any attention. Like true weapons, after they were born with intelligence, they also cherished their own lives. When the two of them clashed, they would definitely be damaged. If they followed their master, it would still be reasonable, but right now, they definitely wouldn't risk their lives for the sake of 2 junior disciples. Seeing that he couldn't kill the enemy with a true weapon, Xiao Jingdao roused all the magic power and essence qi in his body, gathering them in one place. Then, he opened his mouth and spat out a dozen or so white rays of spiritual qi, which instantly transformed into 12 small sparkling swords of half a foot long. With a flash, they flew towards him. Bailey Qingyin's pupils shrank. He recognized that this was Yuan Yang sect's fatal sword. This sword followed the enemy's qi, like maggots in the bones. If you were hit, you would die without a doubt. Usually, it was difficult to block even one sword, and he didn't expect Xiao Jingdao to be able to release 12 at once. Fortunately, there was no such thing as an unbreakable magical power in the world. He knew in advance that Yuan Yang sect was coming, so he was already prepared. With a shout, a 30 feet tall decorated archway appeared in front of him. Then, with a sway of his body, he temporarily withdrew the blood doppelganger, and with another step into the door, he disappeared inside. The fatal sword was an intangible object, and followed into the door without any hindrance. But the next moment, Bailey Qingyin stepped out again, and those famous swords were nowhere to be seen. This decorated archway was called the Thousand Miles Tower Pass, which he had created to deal with the Yuan-Yang sect cultivators this time. Once inside the decorated archway, those who couldn't enter or exit would have to walk thousands of miles before they could come out. At that time, even if the essence qi in the swords didn't dissipate, he would just have to walk in again, and sooner or later, he would be able to wear it out. He looked up and saw that Xiao Jingdao's doppelganger was obviously a bit dimmer than just now, sitting cross-legged with his head lowered. A cold light shone in his eyes. He knew that the fatal sword was the concentration of a cultivator's essence qi. After releasing 12 swords, the opponent must have fallen into a weakened state, and now was the best time for him to kill this person. His body shook slightly, and his doppelganger stepped out from behind him. Then, with a surge of mana, he unhesitatingly released the blood cloud giant hand, about to kill this opponent. But at this moment, Xiao Jingdao suddenly raised his head, and pointed at him. Bailey Qingyin suddenly felt something was wrong, and his mana just now rose, his body's aura stagnated, and then suddenly disappeared from where he was. When he reappeared, he was already sent outside the boundary steel. Almost at the same time, a golden light shot out from the sword steel, as fast as a meteor, and by the time he realized it, it was already above his neck. In the sword steel, Xiao Jingdao's expression relaxed slightly when he saw this scene. This was a clever move he had long prepared. If the fatal sword succeeded, there was no need to use it again. If it didn't, he would definitely think that he had no power to resist. Just when the opponent thought that victory was in his grasp and relaxed a bit, he would turn it out of the sword steel. Although this wouldn't hurt the opponent, the circulation of the mana in his body would slow down because of this. Even if it was only for a short moment, but if he seized this sliver of opportunity to release a killing move, he could kill the opponent on the spot. But just when he thought the outcome was set, a change occurred. Because his mana was insufficient, that blood doppelganger just now hadn't turned out, but now it suddenly took out a spell. Borrowing an object to replace the form. Xiao Jingdao's body trembled violently, as if his chest was ruthlessly pierced by an invisible object. The Taoist robe on his body was torn apart, and a bowl-sized bloody hole appeared. His whole person also fell backwards. If it wasn't for the fact that the robe he passed on was the sect's treasured robe, he would probably have been killed in one blow. Although he was heavily injured, his mind was still clear, and he knew that he had lost this formation. He sighed inwardly, and with a thought, he activated the life-protecting treasure his master had given him. A ray of fiery light suddenly flew out from between his brows, wrapping around him like a cocoon. With a rumble, it actually broke the sword steel, and in a flash, it flew out into the sky. Bailey Qingyin took a look. He felt it was a pity that he couldn't devour this person's Yuanling doppelganger this time, but Xiao Jingdao was the head disciple of the sect, and he definitely had life-protecting treasures on him. He could defeat him, but killing him was indeed very difficult. At this time, above his head, there was suddenly a rumbling vibration, and then the entire blood cloud also began to tremble, showing signs of collapse. He couldn't help but be startled. He understood that without him presiding over it, the blood cloud would definitely be attacked by Zhang Yan, but although the battle in the sword steel took a long time, only a moment had passed in the outside world. He only dared to fight with ease because he knew the nature of this thing, but he didn't expect that Zhang Yan's offensive would be so fierce, and in just a moment, the blood cloud couldn't hold on. He hurriedly leaped up, and sat on the blood lotus. Fang Yaoming's clone went up to stop him, but with a crack, the blood lotus under his feet actually cracked. He was startled, and sighed, knowing that it was already too late. Looking up, he saw the dense blood mist gradually dissipate, and in the boundless golden light, there was a huge palace with 4 corners like pillars, and astral winds revolving above and below. It was carrying wind and thunder, slowly descending. Lofty cloud tower, Bailey Qingyin's expression wasn't too good. He took a breath, and said in a low voice, "Spiritual Master Suo Ling, this thing is hard to break. If it rushes into the spirit cave, Junior can't stop it. Can I ask Spiritual Master to help?" Following his call, a black-robed, cold-faced Daoran came out, and said expressionlessly, "Just now when you saw De Yuan, I didn't help you, so I owe you one. I'll help you one more time, and from now on, we're even. What do you think? This Soaling Yin blood saber was a true killing weapon of the Blood Soul sect, one of the mysterious blood sabers carried by the sect master. How would Bailey Qingyin dare to bargain with him, and said with a cupped fist, I don't dare, I'll do as spiritual master says. The black-robed Daoran didn't say anything more, and his body immediately grew, turning into a 300 zhang long scarlet light that soared into the sky, and chopped down at the lofty cloud tower.